In a small town on the outskirts of Detroit, a boy named Eric Sterling grew up. From a very young age, Eric was surrounded by the world of cars. His father worked as a mechanic at a local auto repair shop, and his mother sold parts. Every day, returning from school, Eric spent time in the garage, watching his father fix cars and telling him about every nuance of their work. Eric learned early on to understand the mechanics of cars. At the age of 10, he could already disassemble and reassemble an engine, which surprised everyone who knew him. But his interest in cars was not just a hobby. He saw motorists coming to his father complaining about car thefts, and that sparked an idea in him. Eric wanted to know how those who managed to steal cars quietly and quickly work. One day, when Eric was 12 years old, he met Tony, a local guy known for his dubious deeds. Tony was older and already had some experience in petty theft. Eric was carried away by Tony's stories about fast money and the adrenaline that you get from car thefts. At first it was just talk, but soon Eric decided to try it himself. At the age of 15, Eric stole a car for the first time. It was an old car abandoned in a parking lot that no one would notice. He carefully studied all the locks, wires, and mechanisms, and then, with a dexterity surprising for his age, he opened the lock and started the engine. This was his first experience, and he felt an incredible rush of adrenaline. Thus began his criminal career. Eric became known among local criminals as a talented car thief. He studied every new car model, learned everything about security systems, and found ways to bypass them. He soon became so skilled that he could steal cars in a matter of minutes. Eric didn't stop there. He began collaborating with larger criminal groups, offering his services to steal expensive and rare cars. This brought him not only money, but also influence in the underworld. Eric quickly realized that he could become the richest car thief in America if he acted smartly and carefully. So, from a small garage in Detroit, began the story of America's richest car thief, a man who turned his childhood hobby into a profitable and dangerous business. As a teenager, Eric Sterling became even more withdrawn. He had little interest in what worried his peers. Parties, sports, studying, all this seemed to him a waste of time. All his energy and attention were focused on cars. Eric spent hours in the garage, disassembling and reassembling engines, studying security systems, and trying new ways to pick locks. Lonely hours spent in the garage made him a true expert. He knew every car model, every security vulnerability. His technical skills far exceeded his age, and soon his knowledge began to bring him his first serious money. Eric began fulfilling orders for local criminal gangs, stealing cars to order. One of these cars was a luxury sports car, which was ordered by one of the local bosses. It was the most difficult task Eric had ever faced, but he handled it brilliantly. He prepared thoroughly, studying all possible methods of bypassing the alarm and defense mechanisms. When he finally stole that car, it was a turning point in his career. Eric became famous not only in his area, but also far beyond its borders. His name began to be recognized in criminal circles, and he was offered more serious and highly paid orders. He realized that his passion for cars could lead him to wealth and power. However, his isolation did not disappear. He preferred to work alone, avoiding unnecessary contacts and connections. He had no friends except his mechanical friends, machines. Eric found his solace in solitude, surrounded by the noise of engines and the smell of oil. He continued to improve, studying new technologies and methods of protection in order to always be one step ahead of his competitors. But even in his closed world, those who would like to use his talents for their own purposes began to appear. Eric realized that the world he had entered was not only lucrative, but also dangerous. He had to be not only smart and technically savvy, but also careful to avoid the pitfalls and betrayals that inevitably accompanied his path to the top. Eric continued to delve into the world of automotive technology while simultaneously avoiding unnecessary attention. His skill in thefts became legendary, and soon not only local gangs but also large crime syndicates from other cities began to turn to him. They offered Eric huge sums of money to steal the most protected and expensive cars. One day, Eric received an order to steal a limousine that belonged to a famous politician. It was not just a car, but a whole fortress on wheels, stuffed with the latest security systems. Eric realized that this work would be incredibly difficult, but the rewards for it were enormous. He agreed, realizing that this assignment would test his abilities and perhaps the most dangerous undertaking of his career. Eric prepared thoroughly. He studied all available data about the limousine, found weaknesses in the security system, and developed a plan to steal it. That night, when everything was ready, he got down to business. The limousine was parked in a secure parking lot surrounded by cameras and armed guards. Eric acted quickly and accurately. He managed to disable the alarm and get into the car unnoticed. However, when he was already on his way to a safe place, he was noticed. The chase began. Eric was in his element. His adrenaline was pumping. He demonstrated incredible driving skills while escaping pursuit. But the police and security guards did not lag behind. He had to use all his knowledge and skills to escape. This chase became a turning point in his life. Eric realized that his skills were attracting too much attention. He needed to change his approach in order to continue his activities and not get caught. He decided to act even more carefully, avoiding risky operations and cooperation with untrusted people. Eric began working on creating a network of reliable contacts and connections. He found several talented mechanics and hackers who could help him in his business. They became his team, although he was still in charge and made all the important decisions. His new strategy began to bear fruit. He continued to steal the most expensive cars, but now he did it with even greater care and thoroughness. Rumors of his incredible exploits continued to spread, and Eric Sterling became a legend in the criminal world. But he always remembered that a mistake could cost him everything. Therefore, he continued to improve, learn new things, and stay one step ahead of his enemies and competitors. Over the years, Eric Sterling continued to increase his wealth and influence. His skills became more and more refined, and his team of dedicated professionals became more and more united. Together they carried out theft after theft, avoiding the attention of the police and competitors. However, Eric knew that in his business he could not stop there. Automotive technology was evolving, safety systems were becoming more complex, and he had to keep up with the times. He began investing significant sums in the latest hacking equipment and software, as well as in training his people. One of the most valuable acquisitions was a hacker named Liam. Liam was a young but incredibly talented cybersecurity specialist who could hack any system. His skills allowed Eric to gain access to machines that previously seemed impenetrable. Liam soon became Eric's right-hand man, and their work together began to produce incredible results. One day, Eric received an offer that was difficult to refuse. A prominent businessman, known for his dubious dealings, offered Eric to steal a unique collector's car, which was in a private museum protected by the best security systems. The reward for successfully completing the task was astronomical, but the risk was no less high. Eric knew that such a task would require careful preparation. He and Liam started by researching everything they could about the museum and its security system. They found that the security system included not only modern cameras and sensors, but also guards trained to respond to any threats. On the night of the operation, Eric, Liam, and the rest of the team were ready for action. Liam hacked the security system, disabling the cameras and alarms for several minutes. This time was enough for Eric to get inside the museum and get to the desired car. But the situation became more complicated when one of the security guards noticed the violation. The alarm was raised in the museum, and security guards began combing the area. Eric acted quickly and calmly. He started the car and headed for the exit, but the guards were already on his tail. Liam remained at the computer and guided Eric, hacking traffic cameras and traffic light control systems to help him escape. Eric rushed through the night streets, escaping from pursuit. Thanks to the well-coordinated work of the team and his skill, he managed to escape. The car was delivered to the customer, and Eric received his reward. This operation further cemented his reputation as the most skilled auto thief in America. However, with each successful case, Eric felt increasing tension. He knew that his activities were attracting more and more attention, not only from the police, but also from other criminal elements. He realized that one mistake could cost him everything. So he continued to stay one step ahead, constantly improving his skills and improving his equipment to remain elusive. Eric felt that his activities were becoming increasingly dangerous. Despite his skill and caution, the number of enemies and envious people grew. Police departments in several states began joining forces to catch him, and rival criminal gangs tried to find ways to get him out of the way. One evening, Eric received an alarming text from Liam. The hacker discovered that several groups had teamed up to eliminate him. This news alarmed Eric. He knew that now his life and the lives of his team were in real danger. He decided that action needed to be taken. Eric gathered his team in a secret meeting. He laid out a plan for them. They were to disappear from view for a while, go into the shadows to avoid direct confrontation with enemies and the police. The team agreed, realizing that this was the only way to survive. They moved into an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city and began preparations for the next stage. Eric knew they needed to change strategy. He decided that they should focus on less risky but more profitable businesses, and also invest in legitimate businesses to launder money and provide cover for themselves. During this time, Eric met an entrepreneur named Richard. Richard was the owner of a chain of auto repair shops and had extensive connections in the automotive industry. Eric offered him a partnership. He would provide rare and expensive cars, and Richard would legalize and sell them. It was a good deal for both of them. With Richard's help, Eric began to legalize his business. They opened several new auto repair shops, which quickly became popular due to their high-quality service and unique cars. This gave Eric the opportunity to hide his criminal activities behind the facade of a legitimate business. However, even in a new, safer position, Eric did not forget about his enemies. He began to implement security systems not only in his workshops, but also in his personal life. His house was equipped with the best security systems, and his movements became carefully planned and hidden. Despite all efforts, the enemies did not give up trying to find him. One day, returning home late at night, Eric noticed that he was being followed. He immediately contacted Liam, who helped him escape by hacking the security cameras and turning off the streetlights at the right time. Eric realized that his life would never be calm as long as he continued his activities. New challenges and dangers awaited him ahead, but Eric was ready for them. He knew that the path he had chosen left no room for weakness or mistakes. His skills, experience, and team were his only weapons in this endless confrontation with enemies and the law. Time passed, and Eric Sterling continued to balance on the line between legal business and criminal activity. His workshops flourished, attracting the attention of not only car enthusiasts, but also potential buyers of rare cars. But despite his outward prosperity, Eric knew that his enemies were not giving up trying to catch him. One day, an old acquaintance from his criminal past came to see Eric. It was Vince, a former partner with whom they had once started their journey in car theft. Vince offered Eric a business that could make a lot of money, but was also extremely risky. It was necessary to steal a collection of rare cars from a private museum on the other side of the country. Eric understood that this case could be their last. He knew that if they succeeded, they would earn enough money to leave the criminal world forever. But if they fail, it will be the end. However, The thirst for adrenaline and challenge made him agree. Eric began to prepare for the operation. He and Liam carefully studied the museum's layout, security system, and possible escape routes. They brought in the best people on their team to ensure everything went flawlessly. Eric personally reviewed every step of the plan to ensure everything was in place. The night of the operation was tense. Eric and his team infiltrated the museum using equipment that allowed them to disable the alarms and cameras. Liam, while at the base, controlled all security systems, providing Eric and his people with up-to-date information about the movements of the guards. Everything was going according to plan until one of the guards accidentally noticed them. A firefight broke out and the team was in danger. Eric, despite the chaos, remained calm and led the team to the exit. They managed to capture several of the most valuable cars and, evading security, escaped from the museum. The chase through the night streets was fast and dangerous. Liam, by hacking traffic lights and blocking roads, helped Eric and his team escape pursuit. When they finally reached the previously prepared shelter, the tension subsided. Eric understood that this was the most difficult thing in his life, but they did it. These cars became their ticket to a new life. Eric and his team decided to go into the shadows and focus on legal business. They opened several new workshops in different cities, starting a new, quieter life. But Eric knew that his past would always be a shadow over his head. Despite his success and wealth, Eric did not forget about those who still wanted to catch him. He continued to live by the mantra of always one step ahead by maintaining his skills and security systems at the highest level. His story became a legend in criminal circles, but Eric himself sought to ensure that his name was no longer mentioned in the context of crimes. So continued the life of America's richest car thief, who, despite all the difficulties and dangers, managed not only to survive, but also to build an empire, hiding in plain sight. Despite their successful museum heist and move into legitimate business, Eric Sterling remained on guard. His workshops flourished, bringing in a stable income, and it seemed to him that he had finally found a way to live in peace, without fear for his life. But the past did not let him go so easily. One day, while Eric was checking out a new batch of cars, an alarming message arrived from Liam. He discovered that someone was actively interested in their affairs and was trying to penetrate their security systems. Liam was sure that this was not the police, but one of the criminal groups who wanted to eliminate Eric. Eric knew they had to act quickly and decisively. He gathered the team and discussed a plan of action. They decided to temporarily evacuate all valuable assets and prepare a shelter in case of attack. Liam continued to monitor the situation, trying to figure out the source of the threat. A few days later, the threat materialized. A group of armed men burst into one of the workshops, demanding information about Eric's whereabouts. The security, trained for such situations, was able to hold them off until the police arrived. But Eric realized that the game was becoming too dangerous. Eric decided to meet with the leader of the group that was hunting him. He set up a meeting on neutral territory, hoping to find a way to reach an agreement. Julian Black, the leader of a criminal gang known for his cruelty and ruthlessness, came to the meeting. The conversation was tense. Julian wanted to take a share of Eric's business and use his workshops to launder money. Eric realized that it was impossible to refuse, but he also did not want to become a pawn in someone else's game. He offered Julian an alternative, a joint project that would bring profit to both parties but leave Eric independent. Julian agreed, but on the condition that Eric prove his loyalty. He was tasked with stealing another unique car, but this time the task was more difficult. The car had to be stolen from one of the most influential people in the criminal world. Eric knew that refusal would have immediate consequences and decided to accept the challenge. He reassembled his team and began preparations. They developed a plan that involved breaking into a high-tech security system and conducting the operation in the utmost secrecy. On the night of the operation, Eric and his team acted as one unit. Liam hacked into systems again, giving them access and minimizing risks. Eric personally supervised the process, showing incredible composure and skill. They managed to steal a car and escape unnoticed, leaving behind only a minimum of traces. Julian was impressed, and the partnership took place. Eric received a temporary respite, but knew that his life would always be in danger. He began to invest more money in legal projects, hoping to one day completely emerge from the shadows of the criminal world. Several years passed, and Eric, despite all the difficulties, managed to maintain his position. His business flourished and he became a legend, a man who was able to go through all the challenges and emerge victorious. But deep down he knew that the path he chose would always be full of dangers and unexpected turns. Eric Sterling and his team continued their criminal activities, despite all attempts to legalize. Their workshops continued to serve as fronts for money laundering and complex car theft operations. Each operation became more and more daring and risky, but also brought in greater profits. One of the most ambitious operations was the theft of a collection of cars belonging to an international dealer known for his connections with the mafia. Eric knew it wouldn't be easy, but the potential profit was too great to pass up. He began planning the operation, carefully studying every detail. Eric and his team infiltrated the dealer's security to gain access to the floor plans and security system. Liam, their hacker, developed software that could disable the alarms and cameras long enough for them to act. Everything was ready, and the team began the operation. The night chosen for the robbery was calm. Eric and his men entered the dealer's premises using fake passes. They acted quickly and smoothly, turning off the alarm and neutralizing the guards. The car collection was magnificent, rare models worth millions of dollars. But things didn't go according to plan when one of the security guards, who turned out to be a veteran of the Secret Services, discovered the break-in. He raised the alarm and Eric's team was trapped. A shootout began, and Eric realized that they were in danger. However, thanks to quick thinking and determination, they managed to escape from the encirclement, taking several of the most valuable cars. This operation attracted the attention not only of the police, but also of rival groups. Eric realized that they needed to hide for a while and lie low. They moved to another state where they began planning their future actions. The temporary shelter allowed them to rest and consider their next steps. Eric knew that their activities had become too visible. He decided it was time to change tactics. Instead of stealing cars on demand, they began developing complex money laundering schemes through shell companies and real estate investments. This gave them the opportunity to remain in the shadows and still continue to earn huge amounts of money. Meanwhile, their competitors were not asleep. One of the groups, having learned about Eric's whereabouts, tried to eliminate him. But thanks to informants and a sophisticated security system, Eric and his team were able to prevent the assassination attempt and strike back. Eric continued to lead his empire using all his experience and knowledge. He understood that in a world where every day could be your last, the main thing is to stay one step ahead. And although his life was full of dangers, he was not going to retreat. After all, for him and his team, this was the only way to success and survival in the cruel world of crime. Eric Sterling and his team continued to grow their criminal empire, carefully balancing risk and reward. Their reputation grew, and they became known as the most professional and elusive car thieves in America. With each successful undertaking, their influence expanded and their wealth increased. One day, when they were discussing another large order, Eric received information about the possibility of robbing a convoy transporting rare cars for auction. The convoy was heavily guarded, and the robbery required not only skill, but also impeccable coordination. Eric realized that this business could be the most risky in their careers, but also the most profitable. The team began preparations. Liam took it upon himself to hack the convoy's monitoring system in order to control its route and the movements of the guards. Eric, along with several henchmen, developed an attack plan that included diversions and false leads to confuse the police and security. The day of the operation arrived. The convoy moved along the highway surrounded by armed guards. At some point, Liam hacked into the convoy's communication system, sending a false message about an accident ahead. Security slowed down, giving Eric's team the opportunity to act. Eric and his men rushed into the convoy in several fast SUVs, blocking it on both sides. They acted quickly and decisively, neutralizing the guards and seizing vehicles. However, when they were already finishing the operation, additional security forces arrived at them which were not in the original plan. A fierce firefight began. Eric and his team found themselves in a difficult situation. They were surrounded, and the chances of a successful completion of the operation were decreasing with each passing second. But thanks to composure and tactical skill, they managed to escape from the encirclement, leaving some of the cars behind, but preserving the most valuable pieces. This operation brought them not only huge profits, but also attracted even more attention from law enforcement agencies. Eric realized that now they needed to act even more carefully and thoughtfully. They decided to temporarily lay low and use their contacts to legalize part of the profits. Despite all the difficulties, Eric and his team continued to remain at the top of the criminal world. Their name has become synonymous with risk and audacity, but also with skill and professionalism. Eric knew that every new day could bring new challenges, but he was ready for them because there was no other way for him and his team. So continued the life of America's richest and most dangerous car thief, a man who turned crime into an art and managed to survive in a world where every decision could be his last. Despite their success and continuous increase in capital, Eric realized that their actions were attracting more and more attention. He decided it was time to expand his activities and go international. In this regard, he could be helped by an old connection in Europe, a French crime boss named René Duval. Eric contacted René and offered him cooperation. René was interested in the opportunities that such a partnership could provide. Together, they developed a plan to steal a unique collection of cars on display in Monaco. This was one of the most prestigious automotive events in the world, and the success of the operation could bring not only huge amounts of money, but also recognition in the international criminal arena. Eric and his team headed to Monaco, where new challenges awaited them. They reviewed the building layout, security diagrams, and event schedule. Liam hacked the security systems to give them access to the cars without raising an alarm. The day of the operation arrived. Eric and his men entered the exhibition area under the guise of personnel responsible for car maintenance. They acted quickly and smoothly, disarming alarm systems and taking control of cars. But suddenly, their plans were thwarted by the appearance of private security hired by the owner of the collection. Eric realized they needed to act immediately. He gave the command, and they began to evacuate the cars while the guards tried to understand what was happening. A tense chase began through the streets of Monaco. Eric and his team used all their skills to escape their pursuers. They managed to escape, but the cost was high. One of the team members, a young mechanic named Tony, was seriously wounded. Eric decided that after this operation they needed to lay low and lick their wounds. They hid in a small Italian town where neither the police nor their competitors could find them. Eric knew their lives would never be safe, but for him and his team, it was part of the game. They continued to operate in the shadows, always ready for new challenges. Eric Sterling remained a legend in the criminal world, an elusive and fearless thief whose name evoked fear and respect. His path was full of dangers, but he was not going to stop, because for him, crime had become a way of life. In Mexico, Eric and his team found temporary shelter but were not about to relax. Carlos provided them with a secure base and resources, and Eric began planning his next operation. This time the goal was more ambitious: to steal a shipment of cars destined for the largest drug cartel in Latin America. This operation could bring incredible money, but the risk was maximum. Eric began by carefully studying the routes and security, using his contacts and information from Carlos. Liam began hacking surveillance and communication systems to give the team an advantage. The plan was complex down to the smallest detail, taking into account all possible scenarios. The night of the operation arrived. Eric and his team, disguised as security guards, entered the warehouse where the cars were stored. Their task was not only to steal cars, but also to do it in such a way as not to leave traces indicating their intervention. Everything went according to plan until one of the drug dealers became suspicious and raised the alarm. A fierce firefight began. Eric and his team, despite superior enemy forces, acted calmly and professionally. They managed to remove some of the cars but encountered strong resistance. Liam, while at the base, provided support by hacking into surveillance systems and disabling security protocols. When they finally escaped the warehouse and reached safety, Eric realized that they had attracted the attention of not only the cartel, but also international law enforcement. It was a game of survival, and they had to act quickly and decisively to stay out of their enemy's reach. Carlos, impressed by their courage and skill, offered to help Eric and his team in hiding and planning new operations. They decided to hide for a while and develop new ways to make money so as not to attract unnecessary attention. Meanwhile, in the United States, police and the FBI joined forces to find and apprehend Eric Sterling. Their photographs and names appeared on the most wanted lists. But Eric knew that there was no peace in the world of crime and continued to make plans for the future. One day, Carlos offered Eric a new business that could change their lives. It was necessary to steal a collection of rare and unique cars from a private museum in England. Eric understood that this business could become not only the most profitable, but also the most difficult in their careers. Preparation for the operation took several months. Eric and his team carefully studied the museum, its security system and security. Liam devised a complex hacking plan involving the use of cutting-edge technology and fake documents. On the night of the operation, they infiltrated the museum using their knowledge and skills. Everything was going according to plan, but suddenly, one of the backup security systems went off and the museum was locked down. Eric realized that they were trapped, but he was not going to give up. Through determination and professionalism, they were able to disable the system and complete the operation, taking with them the most valuable vehicles. This operation brought them not only enormous wealth, but also even greater attention from the authorities and competitors. Eric and his team understood that now their lives would be even more stressful and dangerous. But for them, it was a game in which they were used to winning, no matter what. Thus continued the life of the richest and most daring car thief in America, who knew no peace and always moved forward, despite all obstacles and threats. After a successful operation in England, Eric and his team returned to Mexico to assess the situation and develop new plans. Their reputation in the criminal world continued to grow, but the risks also increased. Eric understood that every new step must be carefully thought out and weighed. Carlos, seeing Eric's success, proposed expanding their cooperation. He proposed organizing a network for the theft and sale of cars that would cover several countries. This would allow them to receive a stable income and diversify risks. Eric agreed, and they began working on creating this network. Eric assembled a team of the most reliable and trusted people. They created a database containing information about expensive and rare cars that could be stolen and resold. Liam developed a tracking and hacking system that would allow them to act quickly and undetected. One of the first major operations within the new network was planned in Miami. The city was to host an exhibition of expensive cars, which attracted collectors from all over the world. Eric and his team decided to take this opportunity to steal some cars straight from the show. Preparations for the operation were thorough. Liam hacked the fairground security system and gained access to the security schedule. The team developed a plan that included using fake passes and documents. Everything went according to plan, but suddenly, an unforeseen circumstance arose. One of the security officers noticed suspicious behavior and called the police. Eric realized that the situation was becoming critical. He decided to act quickly and decisively. The team began stealing cars while simultaneously diverting the attention of security and police. Panic set in, and exhibition visitors began to run away. In the chaos, Eric and his team managed to steal some of the most valuable cars and escape the scene. This operation was risky, but successful. The cars were taken to a secret base where they were prepared for sale. Eric knew that they had attracted attention, but also made a lot of money. He decided to go into hiding temporarily to avoid persecution and develop new plans. Eric and his team spent several weeks in hiding, analyzing the situation and planning new operations. They understood that each new case must be prepared even more carefully in order to avoid mistakes and minimize risks. One day, Carlos offered Eric a new goal: to steal a collection of rare cars from one of the most influential mafiosi in Italy. This case was not only difficult, but also extremely dangerous. Eric understood that failure could cost them their lives, but success would bring incredible money and influence. Preparations for the operation in Italy took several months. Eric and his team studied all the details: security routes, security systems, possible escape routes. Liam devised a complex hacking plan involving the use of cutting-edge technology and fake documents. On the night of the operation, they entered the territory of the mafia, using their knowledge and skills. Everything went according to plan, but suddenly one of the backup security systems worked and the area was blocked. Eric realized that they were trapped, but he was not going to give up. Through determination and professionalism, they were able to disable the system and complete the operation, taking with them the most valuable vehicles. This operation brought them not only enormous wealth, but also even greater attention from the authorities and competitors. Eric and his team understood that now their lives would be even more stressful and dangerous, but for them it was a game in which they were used to winning, no matter what. Thus continued the life of the richest and most daring car thief in America, who knew no peace and always moved forward despite all obstacles and threats. Eric and his team returned from Italy with a sense of triumph. They successfully completed one of the riskiest operations of their careers, and their reputation in the criminal world reached new heights. But along with this, the threats also grew. Eric knew that now they had to act even more carefully to avoid persecution and elimination. They spent several weeks in hiding, assessing their next steps. Liam continued to monitor their safety, hacking into surveillance and communication systems to avoid detection. Carlos suggested that they temporarily stop large operations and focus on smaller but stable sources of income. However, the calm did not last long. One evening, Liam discovered disturbing activity in their security systems. It turned out that one of the rival groups, having learned about their successes, decided to eliminate Eric and his team in order to take over their business. There was no time to prepare, and Eric realized that he needed to act immediately. They prepared their hideout for defense and contacted Carlos, who sent his men to help. On the night when an attack was imminent, Eric and his team prepared for battle. An enemy group burst into the territory and a fierce firefight began. Eric led the defense with composure and strategic thinking. The battle lasted several hours, but with preparation and determination, Eric's team was able to repel the attack. The enemies suffered heavy losses and retreated, realizing that they were faced with a serious enemy. However, Eric knew that this was just the beginning and that they urgently needed to change their location and begin strengthening their positions. After the attack, Eric and his team decided to leave Mexico and move to a safer place. They chose England, where they hoped to lay low and find new opportunities for their business. In England, they met Eric's old friend Michael, who had extensive connections in the criminal world and offered to help. Michael helped them settle in and organize new operations. Eric decided that they now needed to focus on more sophisticated money laundering schemes and the use of new technologies for theft. They began working on creating fake companies through which they could legalize their income. One of these projects was the opening of a network of auto repair shops specializing in rare and expensive cars. This gave them the opportunity not only to earn money, but also to have access to the latest car models that could be used for theft. Liam continued to develop his cybersecurity skills by securing operations and breaching systems. Soon their business in England began to generate stable income. They were able to strengthen their positions and protect themselves from attacks by competitors. But Eric knew that calm could be deceptive and was always ready for new challenges. Despite all the dangers and threats, Eric continued to move forward, using his skills and experience to achieve success. His team remained loyal and ready for any challenge, knowing that their leader would always find a way out of any situation. This is how the life of the richest and most daring car thief in America continued, who knew no fear and always went towards his goal, despite all the obstacles and threats. Eric Sterling and his team settled in England, strengthening their position and developing new business methods. Their networks of auto repair shops became popular among wealthy clients, and this gave them the opportunity to legalize part of their income. But Eric knew that to maintain their criminal empire, it was necessary to constantly be one step ahead. One day, Eric received an offer that he could not ignore. One of Europe's largest rare car dealers needed the services of Eric's team for a theft operation he called Operation Ghost. The target was a collection of cars belonging to a Saudi prince located in his mansion in Switzerland. It was an extremely difficult and risky undertaking, but the reward was enormous. Eric knew that such an operation would require impeccable planning and precision. He assembled a team and began preparations. Liam began studying the mansion's security system using his hacking skills. The team developed a plan that included infiltrating the mansion, disarming the guards, and hacking the security systems. On the night of the operation, Eric and his men entered the mansion using forged documents and special devices to disable the alarm. Everything was going according to plan until one of the security guards noticed suspicious activity and raised the alarm. Eric understood that now every second counts. An intense firefight began. Eric and his team acted calmly and professionally, neutralizing the guards and continuing to move towards their goal. They were able to steal several of the most valuable cars and escape from the encirclement, despite the active resistance of the guards. When they finally reached a safe location, Eric realized that their actions had attracted the attention of not only the authorities, but also international criminal organizations. They decided to temporarily hide and analyze the situation. Carlos, who continued to support them, offered shelter in one of his safe houses in southern Spain. In Spain, they began to develop new plans and strategies. Eric realized that they needed to become even more sophisticated in their methods to stay out of the reach of their enemies and the police. They began investing in the latest technology and hiring the best cybersecurity and hacking experts. However, the calm did not last long. One of the competitors, having learned about their successful operation, decided to strike first. They staged an assassination attempt on Eric in an attempt to eliminate him and take over his business. But Eric, thanks to his intuition and preparation, was able to avoid the attack and organize a counterattack. As a result of the counterattack, Eric's team was able to not only repel the threat, but also destroy the competitor's base, strengthening its position in Europe. Eric realized that they were now playing on the international stage, and the stakes had become even higher. He began to look for new opportunities to expand his business. They decided to open branches of their auto repair shops in other European countries, using them as a cover for their operations. Liam continued to develop his skills by providing security and hacking into enemy systems. Eric Sterling and his team settled in the south of Spain, strengthening their position and expanding their operations. They opened branches of their auto repair shops throughout Europe, creating a cover network for their criminal activities. Each successful operation strengthened their reputation, but also increased attention from authorities and competitors. One day, Eric received an offer that could significantly change their situation. One of the influential crime bosses in Russia, named Ivan Kovalsky, offered cooperation. He needed the services of Eric's team to steal a batch of cars that were seized during criminal showdowns in Moscow. This business was not only risky, but also extremely profitable. Eric understood that such cooperation could open up new horizons for their activities, but also carries enormous risks. He decided to accept the offer and began preparations. Liam began researching the security system, and Eric contacted local contacts to obtain the necessary information. The operation in Moscow was carefully planned. Eric and his team arrived in the city disguised as tourists and began preparations. Liam hacked into the surveillance system to monitor the movements of security and police. The team developed a plan that involved using fake documents and devices to disable the alarms. On the night of the operation, Eric and his men entered the territory where the captured cars were stored. Everything went according to plan, but suddenly, one of the rival criminal leaders appeared and decided to interfere with their business. A fierce firefight began and the situation became critical. Eric and his team showed incredible composure and professionalism. They were able to neutralize the enemy and continue the operation. The carjacking was successful and they managed to flee the scene, leaving chaos and destruction in their wake. The cars were transported across the border and taken to a safe place. This operation brought them not only a lot of money, but also respect from Ivan Kovalsky. As a sign of gratitude and recognition, he offered Eric ongoing cooperation and access to his resources. This opened up new opportunities for Eric's team, allowing them to expand their activities and strengthen their position on the international stage. However, as influence grew, so did threats. Eric knew that now their enemies would be even more persistent and dangerous. He began strengthening his security posture by investing in the latest technology and hiring top talent. Liam continued to develop his skills by providing protection and oversight of all operations. Despite constant threats, Eric and his team continued to move forward. Their criminal empire became more and more powerful, but also more and more vulnerable. Each new day brought new challenges, but they were ready for them. One day, Eric received information that one of his old enemies, whom he once crossed, was preparing a large-scale attack. This was a serious threat, and Eric knew he had to act quickly and decisively. He assembled a team and began developing a plan to prevent the attack and destroy the enemy. The preparation took several weeks. Liam hacked the enemy's surveillance and communication systems to obtain the information he needed. The team developed a detailed plan, including the use of diversionary maneuvers and a surprise attack. On the night of the operation, Eric and his men penetrated enemy territory, acting quickly and decisively. They were able to neutralize the guards and destroy the enemy base, dealing a serious blow to his forces. It was a risky but necessary undertaking that allowed them to maintain their position and secure their empire. Eric Sterling and his team gathered in a luxurious garage filled with expensive cars. The garage was dimly lit, which added mystery and tension to what was happening. On the table in front of them lay drawings and photographs related to their next operation. Eric was focused and calculating. He studied the plans carefully, developing a strategy. Liam, their tech genius, sat at his laptop, checking security systems and preparing all the necessary hacking tools. Jason, the team's strongman, was preparing equipment that might be needed to physically enter the facility. Maria, a driving expert, checked the condition of the cars and prepared them for use. The team knew that their Russian partners were becoming increasingly impatient. The last operation in Moscow was successful, but this only fueled the interest and demands of their new allies. Eric knew they needed to act quickly and decisively to meet their expectations and maintain their influence. The target of the new operation was a large, rare car dealer located in central London. Eric and his team carefully studied the building's security system, security routes, and possible escape routes. Liam hacked into the surveillance system to monitor the movements of security guards and police. Jason and Maria checked all the details of the plan to be prepared for any eventualities. The night of the operation arrived. Eric and his men entered the territory under the guise of security officers. They acted quickly and smoothly, turning off the alarm and neutralizing the security. But everything went wrong when one of the employees noticed suspicious activity and raised the alarm. A fierce firefight began. Eric and his team showed incredible composure and professionalism. Despite active resistance, they were able to steal several of the most valuable cars and escape from the scene. The cars were transported to a pre-prepared base, where they were prepared for further transportation. This operation brought them not only a lot of money, but also even more attention from competitors and authorities. Eric understood that now they needed to act even more carefully and thoughtfully. They decided to temporarily lay low and use their contacts to legalize part of the profits. Despite all the dangers, Eric and his team continued to move forward. Their criminal empire became more and more powerful, but also more and more vulnerable. Each new day brought new challenges, but they were ready for them. This is how the life of the richest and most daring car thief continued, who knew no fear and always went towards his goal, despite all the obstacles and threats. After a successful operation in London, Eric Sterling and his team have many new enemies. Rival gangs and crime syndicates, jealous of Eric's success, decided to eliminate him and take over his business. This put the team in a very dangerous position. Eric understood that his life and the lives of his team were in danger. He began strengthening his defenses by investing in the latest security systems and hiring additional security personnel. However, the enemies did not sleep. They began to watch Eric's every move, trying to find weak points. One night, while Eric and his team were working in the garage, their property was attacked. Enemies used drones and modern technology to infiltrate and attack the area. A fierce firefight began, but thanks to a well-organized defense system and the professionalism of the team, they managed to repel the attack. Eric realized that they urgently needed to change their location. He decided to move his base to a safer place, away from his enemies. They chose one of Carlos's safe houses in southern Spain, which was well protected and had everything they needed to continue their activities. The move went quickly and without complications. In a new location, Eric began to develop a plan to neutralize his enemies. He understood that he needed to act decisively and quickly to eliminate the threat once and for all. Liam continued to monitor all security systems, preparing for new attacks. Meanwhile, Eric collected information about his enemies. He learned that a large criminal group from Eastern Europe was behind the attack, which wanted to take over his business. Eric decided to launch a preemptive strike to show that he was not going to give up. He developed a complex plan to infiltrate enemy territory and destroy their base. The team began preparations, carefully studying all the details of the operation. On the night the plan was to be carried out, Eric and his men infiltrated enemy territory using their skills and technology. Operation was successfully completed. They were able to destroy the enemy base and deal a serious blow to their forces. This gave Eric and his team a temporary break and the opportunity to focus on their business. Despite the temporary relief, Eric knew the threats were still there. Enemies will continue to try to destroy him, and he needs to always be one step ahead. He continued to strengthen his defenses and develop new plans to preserve his empire and protect his crew. This is how the life of Eric Sterling continued, the richest and most daring car thief who knew no peace and was always ready for new challenges. Each new day brought new dangers, but for him and his team, it was a familiar game in which they were accustomed to winning. Eric Sterling and his team continued to grow their criminal empire, but they knew they needed to take even bolder steps to stay on top. One day, Eric learned about a wealthy businessman named Viktor Lavrov, famous for his collection of rare cars stored in his private residence in Switzerland. This collection could be the most valuable prize of their careers. Eric decided it was time to act. He gathered his team and began to develop a robbery plan. Liam hacked the security system of Lavrov's residence to gain access to the building's plans and security routes. Jason and Maria carefully studied all possible entry and exit routes to be prepared for any eventuality. This operation required the utmost care and careful preparation. Eric's team spent several weeks preparing for this case. They studied security schedules, used drones to monitor the area, and prepared fake documents to gain access inside. The night of the operation arrived. Eric and his team entered the residence using their skills and knowledge. Liam hacked into the surveillance system to disable the cameras and alarms for the required amount of time. Jason and Maria made their way inside, neutralizing the guards and opening access to the garage where the cars were stored. When they got to the garage, the rarest and most expensive cars appeared before them. The team began to act quickly and smoothly, loading the vehicles onto specially prepared trucks. However, things did not go according to plan when one of the guards, despite all precautions, noticed them and raised the alarm. A fierce firefight began. Eric and his team found themselves in a difficult situation, but thanks to their preparation and composure, they were able to repel the attack and continue the operation. They managed to load several of the most valuable vehicles and flee the scene before reinforcements arrived. This operation brought them not only enormous wealth, but also new attention from authorities and competitors. Eric understood that they needed to act even more carefully and thoughtfully in order to avoid persecution and preserve their empire. After the robbery, they returned to their base in Spain, where they began preparations to legalize and sell the cars. Liam developed a complex money laundering scheme through shell companies and real estate investments to cover his tracks and protect himself. Despite the temporary relief, Eric knew that their enemies would not stop. He continued to strengthen his defenses and develop new plans to stay one step ahead. Each new day brought new challenges, but for Eric and his team it was a familiar game in which they were accustomed to winning. This is how the life of Eric Sterling continued, the richest and most daring car thief who knew no peace and was always ready for new challenges. His criminal empire grew, but so did the threats that required maximum concentration and determination. Eric Sterling and his team successfully completed the operation to steal Viktor Lavrov's cars. Now in possession of valuable cars, they had to focus on legalizing their loot and evading law enforcement. A few days later, they moved to a new secure base in Spain. Liam began the process of money laundering using complex financial schemes and shell companies. The cars were carefully dismantled and moved to various parts of Europe to confuse any attempts to trace them. However, despite all the precautions, Eric knew that their actions would not go unnoticed. The enemies were not asleep, and competing factions were preparing new attacks. Eric decided to strengthen his position and develop a plan to neutralize the main threats. One day, while exploring new opportunities for his team, Eric received information about a large shipment of exclusive cars that was scheduled to arrive at the port of Genoa, Italy. These cars belonged to a famous businessman and could fetch incredible amounts of money if they could be stolen and sold on the black market. Eric and his team began carefully planning the operation. Liam hacked the port's security systems to gain access to security schedules and routes. Jason and Maria checked all the details of the plan to be prepared for any eventualities. Eric, as always, thought through every step carefully. The night of the operation arrived. Eric and his team entered the port using fake passes and special devices to disable the alarms. They acted quickly and decisively, loading cars onto trucks. But things didn't go according to plan when one of the guards accidentally noticed their actions and raised the alarm. An intense firefight began. Eric and his team, despite superior enemy forces, acted calmly and professionally. They managed to steal several of the most valuable cars and fled the scene, leaving chaos and destruction in their wake. The cars were transported to a pre-prepared base, where they were prepared for further transportation. This operation brought them not only a lot of money, but also even more attention from the authorities and competitors. Eric understood that now they needed to act even more carefully and thoughtfully in order to avoid persecution and preserve their empire. After the robbery, they returned to their base in Spain, where they began preparations to legalize and sell the cars. Liam developed a complex money laundering scheme through shell companies and real estate investments to cover his tracks and protect himself. Despite the temporary relief, Eric knew that their enemies would not stop. He continued to strengthen his defenses and develop new plans to stay one step ahead. Each new day brought new challenges, but for Eric and his team, it was a familiar game in which they were accustomed to winning. One day, Eric received a message that one of the largest criminal groups in Europe was planning to take over their business. This was a serious threat, and Eric knew he had to act quickly and decisively. He assembled a team and began developing a plan to prevent the attack and destroy the enemy. The preparation took several weeks. Liam hacked the enemy's surveillance and communication systems to obtain the information he needed. The team developed a detailed plan, including the use of diversionary maneuvers and a surprise attack. On the night of the operation, Eric and his men penetrated enemy territory, acting quickly and decisively. They were able to neutralize the guards and destroy the enemy base, dealing a serious blow to his forces. It was a risky but necessary undertaking that allowed them to maintain their position and secure their empire. Eric Sterling, the leader of an elusive gang of car thieves, knew that after the latest operation in Italy, their criminal empire had reached its peak. Together with Liam, Jason, and Maria, he developed new plans aimed at strengthening their position and protecting them from competitors. A few weeks after a successful theft in the port of Genoa, Eric received information that a certain businessman, Antonio Ricci, had a collection of exclusive cars stored in his private residence on the shores of Lake Como. It was an ideal target for the next operation. Eric and his team began preparations. Liam began hacking the mansion's security system. Jason and Maria checked all possible entry and exit routes, and Eric thought through strategy and coordination of actions. They knew that this time they had to act extremely carefully because the enemies were not asleep. On the night of the operation, the team entered the mansion using fake documents and technical devices to disable the alarm. They moved quietly and quickly, avoiding cameras and security patrols. Everything went according to plan until one of the guards accidentally noticed Jason and raised the alarm. The situation became tense. Eric, without losing his cool, quickly got his bearings and gave the team instructions. They continued the operation despite the alarm being raised. Liam, using his skills, temporarily disabled the surveillance system, giving them precious time to complete the hijacking. The shootout in the mansion's garage was short but fierce. Eric's team, with their training and skill, was able to neutralize the guards and load several of the most valuable vehicles onto trucks. They fled the scene, leaving chaos and destruction in their wake. After the successful hijacking, they headed to their hideout in Spain. Liam began the process of money laundering using complex financial schemes and shell companies. The cars were dismantled and transported to different parts of Europe for subsequent sale. Eric realized that each operation was attracting more and more attention and decided to temporarily reduce activity in order to focus on strengthening his base and protecting himself from competitors. Despite all the precautions, the tension did not subside. Competitors and enemies were looking for ways to eliminate Eric and take over his business. He knew that he had to always be one step ahead. Together with the team, they developed new strategies and strengthened security systems in preparation for possible attacks. Eric began actively working to expand his legal business. They opened new auto repair shops and invested money in real estate to legalize part of their income and create a cover for their operations. This allowed them not only to maintain, but also to increase their influence in the criminal world. Meanwhile, Eric received information that one of the largest criminal groups in Europe was planning an attack on their base. He realized that he needed to act quickly and decisively. The team developed a plan to prevent the attack and destroy the enemy. On the night of the operation, they entered enemy territory using their skills and technical devices. The operation was successful. They were able to neutralize the guards and destroy the enemy base, dealing a serious blow to their forces. This allowed them to temporarily secure their empire and focus on new plans. After a successful operation in Paris, Eric Sterling and his team decided to temporarily lay low. They moved to a safe house in southern Spain, strengthened their base, and began to develop new plans. Eric understood that their latest operation had attracted the attention of not only competitors, but also international law enforcement agencies. He knew that to preserve his empire, he had to act carefully and strategically. A few weeks later, Eric learned about a major automobile exhibition in Paris, where several unique cars were to be presented. It was the perfect target for their next operation. Eric began preparations by tasking Liam with hacking into the exhibition center's security system to gain access to the security plans. On the night of the exhibition, using fake documents and equipment, the team entered the exhibition center. They acted quietly and smoothly, bypassing surveillance cameras and turning off alarms. But things didn't go according to plan when one of the visitors accidentally noticed their actions and raised the alarm. The situation has become dramatically more complicated. Eric instructed the team to continue the operation despite the alarm being raised. They began stealing cars using a temporarily disabled surveillance system, which gave them time to complete the theft. The firefight was short but fierce. Eric's team was able to neutralize the guards and load several of the most valuable vehicles onto trucks. They fled the scene before reinforcements arrived. After the operation, they returned to their base in Spain, where they began preparations for the legalization and sale of cars. But the attention from the authorities and competitors did not subside. Eric knew they needed to be even more careful to avoid persecution and preserve their empire. Eric decided to expand his activities by opening new branches of auto repair shops in other European countries. This allowed them not only to legalize part of their income, but also to create additional points for conducting operations. They have invested heavily in the latest technology and equipment to stay one step ahead of their enemies. Meanwhile, Eric learned of a new threat. One of the largest criminal groups in Eastern Europe began to take an active interest in their activities and planned to take over their business. Eric decided to launch a preemptive strike. He assembled a team and developed a plan to neutralize the new threat. On the night of the operation, using their skills and technical devices, the team penetrated enemy territory. The operation was successful. They were able to neutralize the guards and destroy the enemy base, dealing a serious blow to their forces. This allowed them to temporarily secure their empire and focus on new plans. Eric knew that the world of crime is always full of dangers, but he was ready for any challenge. His team remained loyal and ready for any challenge, knowing that their leader would always find a way out of any situation. This is how the life of the richest and most daring car thief continued, who knew no fear and always went towards his goal, despite all the obstacles and threats. The FBI was getting closer to exposing Eric Sterling's criminal empire. Agent Jennifer Miller, leading the investigation, scrupulously collected evidence and coordinated the actions of her team. Her goal was clear: to stop Eric and his team, despite their ability to evade justice. Eric knew the pressure was building. He felt that the FBI was on his trail and understood that now every action must be as careful and thoughtful as possible. He increased security measures, and used new technologies to remain undetected. One evening, Liam received an alarming message. The system had detected suspicious activity on their networks. After quickly analyzing the data, Liam realized that the FBI was able to hack some of their communications. Eric gathered a team, and they decided to temporarily move to another base in order to confuse the investigation. Meanwhile, Agent Miller and her team continued their investigation. They established surveillance of Eric's known contacts, monitored financial flows, and wiretapped telephone conversations. Each new piece of evidence brought them closer to their main goal, the arrest of Eric Sterling. Eric understood that he urgently needed to divert attention from his activities. He decided to carry out an operation to steal expensive cars from one of the largest businessmen in London, but this time everything had to go perfectly. Liam hacked the facility's security systems. Jason and Maria prepared all the necessary equipment, and Eric developed a plan down to the smallest detail. The operation went quickly and without complications. The team was able to steal several expensive cars and escape before the police arrived. This gave them the time they needed to move and cover their tracks. The FBI was confused, but Agent Miller knew Eric wouldn't stop. Eric and his team returned to their base in Spain, where they began preparations for the next step. They knew they had to stay one step ahead of the FBI. Eric began studying the agents' actions to predict their next move. Liam continued to work on improving the security system, introducing new methods of encryption and data protection. Meanwhile, Agent Miller has developed a plan to capture Eric. She knew that for a successful arrest, she had to catch him red-handed. The FBI team prepared an operation to establish surveillance of one of Eric's bases. They installed hidden cameras and listening devices, hoping to gather enough evidence to make an arrest. Eric, sensing the impending danger, decided to take countermeasures. He sent his men to check the area and discovered surveillance devices. This gave him time to prepare for the next step. Eric knew that to successfully evade arrest, he would have to do something drastic. He decided to fake his death to confuse the FBI and his rivals. The team prepared everything necessary for the operation, including fake documents and certificates. On the night of the staging, Eric and his team staged a fake accident, which was supposed to convince everyone of his death. Liam made sure that all traces led to fake data. Jason and Maria provided a safe haven for the entire team. After the reenactment, the FBI and Agent Miller were confused. They began an investigation, but could not find evidence that Eric had survived. This gave the team time to take a break and the opportunity to develop new strategies. Eric understood that they had gained time, but his enemies and the FBI would be looking for him again. He continued to develop new plans to stay one step ahead. His team remained loyal and ready for any challenge, knowing that their leader would always find a way out of any situation. After faking his death, Eric Sterling and his team took temporary refuge in a remote part of South America. This was the perfect place to lay low and rework your strategies. They knew that the FBI, confused, would temporarily lag behind them, but sooner or later would begin a new investigation. Eric decided that they needed to start legalizing part of their income and creating new channels for money laundering. They opened a network of auto repair shops and car dealerships in different countries of South America. This gave them not only a stable income but also a cover for their main operations. Despite his apparent death, Eric continued to monitor the actions of his enemies and law enforcement agencies. He knew Agent Miller couldn't be stopped that easily. She was smart and persistent, and sooner or later she would be on his trail again. One day, while Eric was exploring new potential targets, he received disturbing news. One of his trusted men in Europe had been caught and was now willing to testify against Eric and his team in exchange for leniency. Eric understood that if this man spoke, their entire empire could collapse. Eric decided he needed to act immediately. He sent Liam, Jason, and Maria to Europe with the task of neutralizing the threat. Liam developed a plan that involved hacking security systems and creating distractions. Jason and Maria had to neutralize the traitor and take him to neutral territory. The operation in Europe was complex and dangerous. Liam was able to access the surveillance systems and disable them for the required time. Jason and Maria entered the prison where their former colleague was being held. They acted quickly and decisively, managing to get him out before he could testify. Meanwhile, Agent Miller did not give up. She felt that the faking of Eric's death was too perfect and continued to look for clues. Her persistence led her to discover traces of Eric's team's activity in South America. Miller organized a business trip to personally lead the operation to capture them. Eric, having learned of Miller's approach, decided that they needed to hide again. He arranged for the entire team and business to move to a safer location in Southeast Asia, where they had strong connections and the ability to continue their operations. In a new place, Eric began to develop a new plan. He understood that they needed to be even more secretive and careful. Liam introduced new encryption and data protection methods, and Jason and Maria continued to work to strengthen the security of their bases. Eric also decided it was time to strike Agent Miller. He developed a disinformation plan that would confuse her and divert attention from their activities. They created false trails leading to false targets to confuse the investigation. Meanwhile, Miller, unaware of the trap, followed the false tracks. This gave Eric and his team time to recover and strengthen their position. They continued to develop their legal business and simultaneously planned new operations. Agent Jennifer Miller couldn't let go of Eric Sterling's case. The faking of his death seemed too perfect, and she was sure that he was still alive. Without any direct evidence, she continued to dig, hoping to find at least some thread leading to Eric. The FBI stepped up its efforts by creating a special task force to investigate Eric's team. They began to monitor all possible financial flows, suspicious transactions, and movements in the automobile industry. Miller knew that to catch Eric, she had to follow the money. One day, while analyzing financial statements, they noticed strange movements of capital through shell companies in South America and Southeast Asia. This was consistent with known money laundering techniques used by Eric and his team. Miller decided it was time to act. The FBI began cooperating with international law enforcement agencies. They conducted a series of raids on suspicious companies and discovered many documents pointing to Eric's activities. Although there was no direct evidence, the tracks led to his empire. Miller personally flew to Southeast Asia to coordinate with local authorities. They began following Eric's known contacts, hoping to get on his trail. The agents managed to establish surveillance of one of his trusted men, who often visited a hidden base in the jungle. Eric and his team had no idea they were being watched. They continued to plan new operations and grow the business. But Liam, noticing strange activity on their networks, became suspicious. He tightened security measures, but it was too late. The FBI was one step ahead. Miller organized an operation to capture the base. A special forces team surrounded the area and prepared for the assault. Eric, sensing the approaching danger, decided to act immediately. He ordered the team to leave the base and move to previously prepared shelters. Chaos began. Eric's team managed to leave just minutes before the assault. The FBI took over the base, but Eric and his men disappeared. Miller was disappointed, but found a lot of documents and equipment that could help further the investigation. Eric and his team, hiding in a new shelter, realized that they needed to radically change their approach. They began using more sophisticated encryption and disinformation methods to confuse the investigation. Liam developed a system that allowed them to operate even more secretly. Miller, studying the captured materials, realized that Eric was still at large and continuing his activities. She strengthened the team and began to analyze every step, every financial transaction to find new traces. Agents soon discovered a new trail leading to a major rare car deal in Europe. Miller realized this was her chance to catch Eric. The FBI launched an operation to intercept the deal, hoping that Eric would be personally present at it. Eric's team, unaware of the ambush, began a car sales operation. But when they arrived at the meeting place, they were surrounded by FBI and local police agents. A fierce firefight began. Eric and his team, showing incredible composure and professionalism, were able to escape from the encirclement and escape. Miller was furious, but she didn't give up. She knew that now Eric would act even more carefully, but she believed that their efforts would lead to success. The FBI continued its investigation without leaving a single lead. Eric and his team knew that time was running out. They began developing a new plan that would allow them to escape forever and start a new life. But Miller was too close, and the game became more and more dangerous. The FBI moved inexorably towards its goal, increasing its efforts and expanding its network of informants. Agent Jennifer Miller and her team continued to search for leads that could lead them to Eric Sterling and his gang. After numerous failures and missed opportunities, they finally found what they were looking for. By analyzing captured documents and data, the FBI discovered connections between Eric's various operations and his base around the world. They identified several key gang members who were linked to recent crimes in Europe and South America. This data became the basis for the development of a large-scale operation to capture them. Miller decided to strike in several directions at the same time. The FBI team, working with international law enforcement agencies, began coordinating a series of raids that would take place simultaneously in several countries. This was supposed to deprive the gang of the opportunity to quickly regroup and escape. At dawn, the operation began. In several cities in Europe and South America, FBI agents and local special forces simultaneously raided the gang's predetermined hideouts. Miller's team acted quickly and decisively, giving the gang members no time to resist. Liam and Maria were in one of these hideouts in Barcelona. Liam, noticing suspicious activity online, tried to warn Eric, but it was too late. FBI agents broke down the door and forced their way inside. Liam attempted to destroy the evidence, but Miller personally led the operation and managed to capture him before he could do so. Maria, despite her experience, was captured after a short shootout. Meanwhile, in Rio de Janeiro, Jason was in one of their warehouses. He was preparing for another operation when SWAT agents suddenly surrounded the building. A fierce firefight began, but numerical superiority and the surprise of the attack played a role. Jason was wounded and captured alive. In total, the FBI managed to capture 70% of the gang members, including key players such as Liam, Maria, and Jason. This victory was a huge achievement for the agency and personally for Miller, who tirelessly followed Eric all these years. Eric, while in his new hideout in Southeast Asia, learned of his team's capture. He realized that the situation was becoming critical. Despite the loss of key people, he was not going to give up. Eric began to develop a plan to save his people and continue his activities. Meanwhile, Miller and her team began interrogating the captured gang members, hoping to gain information about Eric's whereabouts. Liam, Maria, and Jason were tough nuts to crack, but Miller believed she could squeeze the information she needed out of them. Eric decided to act quickly and decisively. He used his remaining contacts and resources to organize a daring plan to free his people. Time was short and the stakes had never been higher. Eric knew that the next operation would be the most difficult of his life, but he was willing to risk everything for the sake of his team and the continuation of their business. Thus continued the game of cat and mouse between Eric Sterling and the FBI. Miller was confident that she would soon catch the main criminal, but Eric was still at large, ready for new challenges and ready to continue the fight. After capturing 70% of the gang members, the FBI increased pressure on those remaining at large. The remaining members of the gang, including Eric Sterling himself, realized that their time was running out. They knew that with each new operation the FBI was getting closer, and that their enemies would not stop until they destroyed the entire organization. Eric gathered the remaining gang members to their new hideout in Southeast Asia. He understood that drastic measures had to be taken to preserve his lives and freedom. The remaining members of the gang, exhausted by constant flight and fighting, began to lose faith in success. Fear and uncertainty took over them. One night, as they discussed their future plans, Eric realized that many of his people no longer wanted to continue the fight. Some of them began to openly talk about wanting to leave the gang and disappear. Eric knew that trying to keep them by force would only lead to splits and betrayals. Eric decided to give his people a choice. He gathered everyone and announced that everyone was free to do as they pleased. He provided them with false documents, money, and plans to escape across borders. It was a risky decision, but Eric knew that this was the only way they could maintain at least some safety. The remaining gang members began to leave the hideout one by one. Some went to Europe, some to South America, some to Australia. Eric knew this was the end of their once powerful organization. He was left practically alone, with only a few faithful people who did not leave him. Meanwhile, Agent Miller did not give up. The FBI continued to track all possible escape routes for gang members. Border guards and intelligence agencies in various countries were alerted, and the hunt for the fugitives began. Some of them were caught at the borders, others in safe houses and shelters. Eric, left with a few faithful people, decided to hide in one of the most remote corners of the world, on a small island in the Pacific Ocean. He knew that this was only a temporary measure and that he would have to come up with a new plan to continue to survive. On an island far from civilization, Eric began to develop new strategies. He understood that the world of crime had now changed forever for him. Without his team and resources, he had to start from scratch. He decided to use his skills and knowledge to build a new life, far from persecution and danger. Agent Miller, having learned about the breakup of the gang, felt the bitterness of victory. She knew that Eric was still at large and that he would not go down without a fight. She continued to follow every possible lead, hoping that one day she would be able to catch him and put an end to this long hunt. Thus ended the era of Eric Sterling as the most daring and richest car thief. Now he was forced to hide, start a new life, and look for ways to survive in a new, changed world. But even on a remote island far from civilization, he did not lose hope and readiness to fight. His story didn't end, it just started a new chapter. Agent Jennifer Miller tirelessly continued her investigation, realizing that success was close. After capturing 70% of the gang members, the FBI increased its pressure, launching a large-scale operation to capture the remaining criminals. Miller used all available resources, including international law enforcement agencies, to monitor the movements of the fugitives. Border security forces, intelligence agencies, and special forces were deployed to track every move of the remaining gang members. The FBI developed a sophisticated surveillance and data collection system to predict their next move. Eric Sterling and his remaining comrades were hiding on a small island in the Pacific Ocean. They hoped that remoteness and isolation would help them avoid persecution. But Agent Miller, analyzing the captured data and testimony, managed to find out their location. She realized that the key to capturing the entire gang was to capture Eric. Miller organized an international operation in which the intelligence services of several countries participated. They began to gradually surround the island, establishing surveillance and preparing for the decisive blow. The operation had to be done quickly and silently to avoid bloodshed and give Eric and his men the least chance of escape. At dawn, the operation began. Special forces landed on the island and began to move towards the gang's hideout. Eric and his companions were taken by surprise. Explosive devices and smoke grenades helped disorient the gang. The special forces acted quickly and professionally, capturing one after another. Eric, realizing that there was no way to escape, decided to give up. He knew that continuing to fight would only lead to the death of his people. When the special forces burst into their hideout, Eric raised his hands without resistance and ordered his men to cease fire. All gang members were captured and taken to an international detention center. Agent Miller personally led the operation to transport criminals to the United States, where they awaited trial. For her, this was the culmination of many years of work and a real victory. Soon after the arrest, trials began. The testimony of Liam, Maria, Jason, and other gang members helped to restore the full picture of their criminal activities. Eric Sterling, knowing that his life as a free man was over, decided to cooperate with the authorities, hoping for a reduced sentence. Agent Miller received awards and recognition for successfully completing this complex and dangerous operation. She knew the world was a safer place because of her efforts and the efforts of the entire FBI team. Eric Sterling and his associates were sentenced to long prison terms. Their criminal empire collapsed, and the world of crime lost one of its most daring and talented criminals. Now behind bars, Eric realized that his time had passed, and that his every move was carefully monitored and studied. Thus ended the story of the Eric Sterling Gang, the most dangerous and elusive group of car thieves. The FBI was able to prove that even the most skilled criminals cannot escape justice if professionals like Agent Jennifer Miller are on their trail. Eric Sterling sat in his prison cell, contemplating the events of recent years. He understood that his life had changed dramatically and that he would never return to his old way of life. His team disintegrated, and most of the key members of the gang were behind bars. The remnants of their once mighty empire were destroyed. Agent Jennifer Miller, thanks to her tenacity and professionalism, was able not only to stop one of the most dangerous criminals, but also to undermine an entire criminal network. Her work has been recognized at the highest level, and she has received well-deserved awards for her contributions to community safety. But for her, it was not just a job. It was a personal matter, and she was proud that she was able to see it through to the end. The trials of gang members were long and thorough. Each of them received a well-deserved punishment. Liam, Maria, Jason, and others realized that their life in crime had led them to an inevitable end. Many of them, including Eric, began to cooperate with the authorities, hoping for a reduced sentence. Eric, sitting in his cell, reflected on his past. He recalled how he began his activities, how he built an empire step by step. I remembered my faithful comrades and those moments when they were at the pinnacle of success. But he also understood that every step they took was not only risky, but also illegal. One day, Jennifer Miller came to see Eric in prison. She wanted to see the man she had been pursuing for so long. Their meeting was short, but significant. Eric looked at her and said, "You did what you had to do. We all knew that sooner or later this would happen. I don't hold a grudge. Now I have time to think about many things." Jennifer replied, "I was just doing my job. But you know you had a choice, and you chose this path. I hope you find answers to your questions." After this visit, Eric began to spend more time thinking. He wrote memoirs in which he shared his experiences and warned others against choosing the criminal path. His books became popular in the prison library and even beyond, serving as a reminder that crime does not go unpunished. The story of Eric Sterling and his gang may have ended, but the lessons it taught remain. The world of crime has lost one of its most talented and dangerous players, but society has gained a lesson that justice will always prevail, even if the path to it is long and difficult. For Jennifer Miller, This wasn't just another case. It was confirmation that her work mattered and that every step she took in the fight against crime was beneficial. She continued her career by solving new cases and helping society become safer. Thus ended the story of a legendary gang of car thieves and their elusive leader. This was a story about how perseverance, professionalism, and faith in justice can lead to victory over even the most insidious and skilled criminals. Second story of the criminal. The childhood of a gang leader. In the heart of Chicago's poor neighborhood, a boy named Daryl James grew up. Life in these places was far from safe. Crime, drugs, and violence surrounded him from a very early age. Daryl's father was in prison, and his mother worked several jobs, trying to provide her children with at least the minimum conditions for survival. Daryl learned early on that in order to survive and protect his family, he would have to become strong and fearless. Already at the age of 8, he began to get into fights, defending himself and his younger sister from street hooligans. His natural strength and indomitable spirit quickly distinguished him among his peers. At school, Daryl was known for his intelligence and leadership skills. Teachers saw potential in him, but the streets of Chicago dictated their own rules. By the age of 12, he was already involved with a local street gang, running small errands and learning the ins and outs of street life. It was then that he met his future colleagues, Michael, Jason, Tarek, Kevin, and Jerome. Formation of a gang. Over time, Daryl and his friends became known in the area for their daring and cruel methods. They were not afraid of anyone or anything, acting with cold prudence and incredible cruelty. They were united by a common goal: to become the most powerful and dangerous criminals in the city. Daryl, with his natural intelligence and strategic thinking, quickly realized that there is strength in unity. He brought his team together by teaching them to act as one. Together, they began with petty crimes, but soon their appetites and ambitions grew. They took on increasingly dangerous and large-scale operations, leaving no witnesses and avoiding the police. Thus began the story of the most brutal and dangerous gang in America, led by the indomitable Daryl James. Their path was strewn with blood and fear, and no one could predict what heights they would rise to or what horrors they would leave behind. Daryl and his team understood that to achieve their ambitious goals, they needed not only cruelty and force, but also influential patrons. Their crimes attracted the attention of very rich and powerful people who needed executors for the most dirty deeds. These people offered big money to eliminate competitors, traitors, and those who stood in their way. Working for these powerful people, Daryl's gang began to receive assignments to eliminate key figures in various fields, from drug dealers to corrupt politicians. Each murder was carefully planned, and Daryl personally supervised every step of the operation, ensuring that there were no witnesses or leads that could lead to them. The money they earned allowed the gang to live a luxurious lifestyle that they had previously only dreamed of. Expensive cars, luxurious houses, and the best weapons and equipment became part of their daily lives. But with wealth and power comes a constant threat: rival gangs and enemies seeking revenge. One day, they were hired by one of the most influential businessmen in America to eliminate a competitor who was interfering with his plans to expand his business. This was one of the most difficult tasks, which required not only strength, but also intellectual abilities. The gang developed a plan for several weeks, calculating every step and possible risks. During the operation, they encountered serious resistance. The security of their target was prepared and armed to the teeth. A brutal firefight ensued, in which Daryl and his team showed all their skills and composure. Despite all the odds, they completed the task and returned with a huge amount of money, further strengthening their reputation as the most dangerous mercenaries in the criminal world. With each new task, their reputation grew, and with it, the number of enemies. Daryl understood that there was no place for weakness in this world and that every mistake could be his last. But while he was at the head of his gang, no one could stop them on the path to even greater power and wealth. And Mikey Johnson was Daryl's right-hand man and his closest friend since childhood. Since childhood, Michael was distinguished by incredible physical strength and resilience. He was the one who always protected his friends and brought fear to their enemies. His hallmark was his absolute devotion to Daryl and his willingness to take any risks for the success of their affairs. Mikey was also an excellent marksman and skilled with weapons, which made him indispensable in any firefight. Jason J. Williams, known for his cunning and resourcefulness, was the brains of the gang. He developed complex plans and strategies to ensure the success of their operations. Jason could hack any security system and enter any building without leaving a trace. His skills in electronics and computers allowed the gang to complete the most difficult tasks that others seemed impossible. Tarek Tebow Brown was a close combat and explosives expert. His physical fitness and martial arts knowledge made him a formidable force in any fight. Tarek was also responsible for the preparation and use of explosive devices, which allowed the gang to carry out sabotage and eliminate targets with maximum efficiency. Kevin K.D. Douglas was the driver and escape artist. His driving skills were legendary. He could steer a car out of the most dangerous situations, leaving the police far behind. Kevin was also an excellent mechanic, always keeping their vehicles in top condition and ready for any eventuality. Jerome J. Rock Robinson was the youngest and most aggressive member of the gang. He grew up in the most difficult conditions and showed violent tendencies from a young age. Jerome was ruthless and knew no fear, which made him an ideal performer in the most dangerous and risky tasks. His ferocity and determination inspired fear not only among his enemies, but also among his fellow gang members. Each of these people had their own unique skills and traits that made Daryl James's gang the most dangerous and effective in the criminal world. Together, they were an invincible force, willing to do anything to achieve their goals and protect each other. Daryl and his team became increasingly famous and dangerous. With each new assignment, their reputation grew, attracting the attention of both potential clients and enemies. One day, they received an offer they couldn't refuse. They were hired by one of the most powerful and influential people in the country. This man, known as Mr. White, was a shady businessman who ran many illegal operations and had connections at the very top of government. The task was extremely difficult. They had to eliminate the head of a rival cartel that was threatening Mr. White's business. The target was guarded in his mansion, equipped with the latest security systems and guards ready for any attack. Daryl knew that the success of this mission could provide them with incredible wealth and protection from Mr. White, but could also spell disaster if it failed. They began to prepare, carefully studying the security route, the layout of the building, and all possible routes of approach and escape. Jason hacked the mansion's security system, gaining access to cameras and security circuits. Mikey and Tarek practiced their moves down to the last detail so they could be prepared for any scenario. Kevin prepared the vehicles and planned escape routes, and Jerome was prepared for the most brutal actions if things did not go as planned. Finally, the day of the operation arrived. On a dark night, under the cover of rain, they entered the mansion. Jason disabled the cameras and security systems, allowing them to enter. Mikey and Tarek quickly and silently eliminated the first guards, clearing the way for Daryl and Jerome. Daryl led his team with confidence and composure, not making a single mistake. They entered the main hall of the mansion where they met fierce resistance. A firefight ensued, in which their skills and teamwork proved decisive. Jerome fought with such fury that no one could stop him, and Tarek cleverly used his explosives, destroying barriers and creating chaos among the guards. When they got to the head of the cartel, he already understood that his time had come. Daryl completed the task without hesitation, leaving behind only corpses and destruction. They quickly left the crime scene following Kevin's plan, and disappeared into the night without leaving a single trace. The return to Mr. White went smoothly. He was impressed by their professionalism and brutality, rewarding them handsomely for the task they completed. But along with the money came a new understanding. They became part of an even more dangerous game, where lives and destinies are at stake. Daryl's gang continued to grow in power and influence, becoming an integral part of the shadow world of crime. Their path was full of blood and fear, but they knew that stopping would mean death. New challenges and dangers awaited them ahead, but Daryl and his team were ready for anything that could stand in their way. The return to Chicago was triumphant. Mr. White not only paid generously, but also provided the gang with new resources, weapons, technology, and connections. Daryl understood that they were now not just performers, but also important players in the world of crime. Several months after successfully completing an assignment for Mr. White, Daryl received a new offer, this time from a powerful politician whose career was in jeopardy due to incriminating information. The politician offered a huge sum for the destruction of all evidence and the elimination of the person who possessed this information. Daryl's team got to work again. Jason opened all the databases and found out where the documents were stored. Mikey and Tarek prepared the infiltration plan, while Kevin provided transportation and escape routes. Jerome was prepared for any eventuality, ready to use his strength and aggression. The operation began in an abandoned building where a man with incriminating evidence was hiding. There were many traps and guards around, but Daryl's team, acting coordinatedly and accurately, overcame all obstacles. Jason found and destroyed all the documents, and Mikey and Tarek ensured the team's safety by neutralizing the guards. Daryl personally eliminated the target, leaving behind another bloody mark. The success of this operation further strengthened their position. The politician was pleased, and rumors of the power of Daryl's gang spread throughout the criminal world. Soon they were approached by other influential individuals who wanted to solve their problems with the help of the most brutal and effective performers. One day, they received an offer that changed everything. One of Mexico's largest drug cartels offered them a deal to eliminate competitors and protect drug supplies to the United States. It was an incredibly risky and difficult task, but the reward was enormous. Daryl knew that this move could take them to the next level or destroy everything they had built. He gathered the team to discuss. Mikey, Jason, Tarek, Kevin, and Jerome were willing to take risks for the opportunity to expand their influence and make a huge fortune. The decision was taken. They began to plan and prepare for the operation, studying all the details and possibilities. This new challenge could be the most dangerous of their careers, but Daryl and his team were determined to succeed, no matter the cost. The trip to Mexico began with careful preparation. Jason hacked into Mexican police databases and collected all the information on rival cartels, their leaders, and supply routes. Mikey and Tarek trained in shooting and hand-to-hand combat, honing their skills to perfection. Kevin studied the roads and planned escape routes, while Jerome prepared for the violent confrontations that were sure to lie ahead. When everything was ready, they went to Mexico. The path was full of dangers. Enemies could be waiting for them at every step, and the police were always on the alert. However, Daryl and his team were ready for anything. Their first assignment in Mexico was to eliminate one of the leaders of a rival cartel who controlled an important drug supply route. The operation began with reconnaissance. Jason began tracking the target, studying his habits and routes. Mikey and Tarek spent several nights watching the guards and identifying weaknesses in the defense. Finally, Day X arrived. Under cover of darkness, they entered enemy territory. Jason hacked the security systems and disabled the cameras, opening the way for the team. Mikey and Tarek quickly and silently eliminated the guards on the way to the main goal. Daryl and Jerome, armed to the teeth, entered the mansion and found their target. The firefight was short, but brutal. Before the cartel leader even knew what was happening, Daryl's bullet pierced his heart. The operation went flawlessly, and they quickly left the crime scene, following the route Kevin had planned. This successful operation brought them not only a lot of money, but also recognition from the Mexican drug cartel. They became known as elusive assassins, capable of carrying out any mission. However, with success came new dangers. Competitors began to hunt them down, realizing that their influence was growing too quickly. The next task was the destruction of a large drug laboratory belonging to another cartel. It was a heavily guarded area surrounded by jungle and minefields. Daryl knew that this would be their most difficult task yet, but he also knew that success would open up new opportunities for them. They began preparations, developing an operation plan. Jason studied the minefield patterns and found safe entry routes. Mikey and Tarek conducted reconnaissance, figuring out the location of the guards and security systems. Kevin planned his escape route, and Jerome prepared for the fiercest fight of his life. When everything was ready, they went into the jungle. Making their way through minefields and avoiding traps, they reached the laboratory. Acting coordinatedly and quickly, they neutralized the guards and destroyed the laboratory. The explosion was heard several kilometers away, and they managed to leave the area before reinforcements arrived. The success of this operation further strengthened their reputation. Now they were at the top of the criminal world, but they knew that staying there would be even more difficult. New challenges and dangers awaited them ahead, but Daryl and his team were ready to take on any challenge to continue their path to the top. The return to Chicago after successful operations in Mexico was triumphant. They strengthened their positions not only in America, but also beyond its borders. Money flowed like a river, and their influence grew every day. However, with this came new problems and challenges. One day, Daryl was approached by an even more influential client known as Mr. Gray. He proposed a task that was both very profitable and extremely dangerous. They needed to eliminate the head of a powerful financial corporation that was involved in money laundering and financing criminal gangs around the world. This task took a whole new level of difficulty, requiring careful planning and execution. The team began preparations. Jason hacked the corporation's security systems, collecting all the information about its head and his travel routes. Mikey and Tariq studied the security measures and made a plan of attack. Kevin worked out several escape routes, and Jerome prepared for possible violent confrontations. The task was complicated by the fact that the head of the corporation, Mr. Lawrence, was constantly guarded by elite bodyguards and traveled in armored vehicles. They decided to act cunningly, to set up an accident on one of the routes in order to lure Mr. Lawrence out of the car. The day of the operation has arrived. They caused an accident that involved Mr. Lawrence's car. When the guards were distracted by a security check, Daryl and Jerome sprang into action, neutralizing the bodyguards and capturing their target. Everything was planned to the smallest detail, and they quickly left the scene, leaving only chaos and destruction in their wake. Mr. Lawrence was taken to a pre-arranged location where Daryl personally had a talk with him. The information they gained was invaluable and allowed them to take down several major criminal schemes while eliminating a powerful enemy. Mr. Gray was impressed by their professionalism and rewarded them generously. But with new success came new enemies. The police and FBI began to hunt them in earnest, and rival gangs prepared for war. Daryl realized that they were now targets not only for law enforcement, but also for anyone who wanted to take their place. They increased their security measures, moved to new bases, and began to cooperate with other criminal groups to strengthen their position. Mikey and Tarek developed complex defense plans. Jason improved surveillance and encryption systems, and Kevin prepared several emergency escape routes. Jerome was prepared for any eventuality, armed to the teeth and ready to defend his friends. The gang continued its activities, becoming more sophisticated and cautious. They knew that now their every action was under close scrutiny, and any mistake could be fatal. But Daryl and his team were ready for anything. They believed that their strength and unity would help them overcome any obstacles and maintain their influence in the criminal world. New missions, new enemies, and new challenges awaited them ahead. They knew that their path would be full of dangers, but they were ready for it, because for them, there was no other choice. Daryl and his team continued to move forward without looking back, knowing that each next step could be their last. Time passed, and Daryl's gang continued to expand its influence. Their reputation was so formidable that many criminal organizations chose to form alliances with them rather than become their enemies. However, success always comes with new challenges, and they were soon faced with a threat that could change everything. One day, Daryl received information that a major FBI operation was being prepared against them. Agents were able to gather evidence against the gang and were planning a massive raid to put an end to their activities once and for all. This was a serious threat that could not be ignored. Daryl brought the team together to discuss. Jason proposed a plan to identify the agents and undermine their operation from the inside. Mikey and Tarek began preparing their defenses, studying possible infiltration routes and weak points in the security system. Kevin prepared several alternate routes for a quick escape, and Jerome provided supplies of weapons and ammunition. Their plan was simple: intercept the information, prepare for an attack, and set up an ambush. Jason, using his skills, penetrated the FBI systems and learned all the details of the upcoming operation. They knew when and where the attack would strike, and they prepared for it. The day of the raid arrived. FBI agents, thinking they had caught the gang by surprise, began storming the building where Daryl and his team were supposedly located. But instead, an unpleasant surprise awaited them. The building was mined, and the real base of the gang was located in another place. As soon as the agents entered, a powerful explosion occurred, destroying all evidence and significantly weakening the FBI forces. Taking advantage of the chaos, Daryl and his team struck the agents remaining outside the building. The firefight was short but fierce. The FBI suffered a major defeat, and many agents were killed or injured. Daryl's gang once again showed their elusiveness and cruelty. However, Daryl understood that the victory was temporary. They knew that the FBI would not stop and would continue the hunt. Therefore, it was decided to temporarily leave Chicago and move to another city in order to confuse his pursuers and lie low. They chose Los Angeles, a city of opportunity and hidden threats. Here they could start over, use their connections and resources to create a new base and continue their activities. Jason hacked local databases, providing them with new documents and legends. Mikey and Tarek explored the new city, finding safe places and possible hiding places. Kevin prepared cars and routes for quick travel, and Jerome was prepared for any eventuality. Moving to Los Angeles opened up new horizons for them. They began working with local criminal groups, forming new alliances and strengthening their influence. But they knew that the FBI was still on their trail, and they could not relax. Daryl and his team continued to act carefully and calculatedly, always one step ahead of their enemies. Their path was full of dangers, but they were ready for anything. Every day brought new challenges and trials, but they knew that only together they could overcome all obstacles. Daryl and his gang continued their rise to the top of the criminal world, knowing that even greater challenges and incredible opportunities awaited them. Living in Los Angeles brought new challenges and opportunities. In this city, where criminal networks were as vast as the Hollywood studios, Daryl and his team quickly found their niche. They began working with local cartels, offering their services to eliminate competitors and protect cargo. Their professionalism and brutality made them sought after by crime bosses. One of these tasks was the elimination of a famous drug lord who began to expand his territories too actively. The order was very risky, since the target was surrounded by strong security and had many influential allies. But Daryl understood that success in this matter would strengthen their position in Los Angeles and bring in a lot of money. Jason began his preparations by hacking security systems and collecting all the information about the drug lord and his habits. Mikey and Tarek spent several nights observing the facility and identifying weaknesses in its security. Kevin prepared cars and escape routes, and Jerome was equipped to the teeth, ready for any eventuality. The operation began at night when the target returned to his luxurious mansion after a party. Jason disabled the security systems, allowing the team to enter the compound. Mikey and Tarek quickly and silently eliminated the outer guards, clearing the way for Daryl and Jerome. They entered the house and began methodically clearing it, moving towards their goal. The firefight inside the house was short but intense. Daryl and Jerome acted as a unit, eliminating their enemies with cold calculation. The drug lord tried to escape, but Daryl caught up with him in the last room. One accurate shot and the task was completed. They quickly left the crime scene, following the route Kevin had planned. The entire operation took less than half an hour, but its consequences were enormous. The Los Angeles criminal underworld respected and feared Daryl and his team even more. The customer was pleased and generously rewarded them, and their reputation as the most dangerous and effective mercenaries only strengthened. However, with each new success, the risks also grew. The police and FBI intensified their efforts to catch them, and competitors began to unite to eliminate the new threat. Daryl understood that this could not continue for long, and they must be prepared for any surprises. One day, having received information about a major FBI operation aimed at capturing them, Daryl decided to be proactive. Jason figured out where and when the operation would take place, and they devised a plan to intercept the agents and destroy all evidence. On the appointed day, they ambushed the warehouse where the agents were to meet. The firefight was brutal, but Daryl's team once again proved its invincibility. They destroyed all agents and all evidence, once again leaving without a trace. These events made Daryl think about the future. He understood that every day it was becoming more and more difficult to stay afloat, and sooner or later they would have to make a choice: continue to the top or look for new ways to survive. But for now, Daryl and his team continued to move forward, confident in their abilities and ready for any challenge. Each new day brought new challenges, but they knew that only together they could overcome all obstacles and maintain their place at the top of the criminal world. Several months have passed since Daryl's team disrupted a major FBI operation. They continued to act cautiously, constantly changing their bases and avoiding unnecessary attention. However, living in the shadows began to take its toll on their nerves. The constant anticipation of threat and the need to be one step ahead of enemies required incredible endurance and discipline. One day, they received an offer from a mysterious man known under the pseudonym Mr. Black. He was a powerful crime lord whose power extended far beyond Los Angeles. Mr. Black invited them to participate in a complex operation to rob the largest bank in San Francisco. The reward promised to be fabulous, but the risks were also colossal. Daryl pondered for a long time whether to take on this matter. But the understanding that the success of this operation could give them the opportunity to retire and start a new life outweighed them. The team began preparations. Jason hacked into banking systems and studied all possible security schemes. He also gained access to the building's layout and collection routes. Mikey and Tarek analyzed all possible entry and exit points, developing a plan that would allow them to enter the bank undetected. Kevin prepared vehicles and routes for a quick escape, and Jerome studied the location of the guards and security cameras. The operation was scheduled for the night when the bank was supposed to be almost empty. They arrived in San Francisco early, setting up a temporary base and beginning surveillance of the facility. Jason hacked the security system, disabling the cameras and alarms, allowing Mikey and Tarek to get inside unhindered. They moved quickly and precisely, eliminating the guards and advancing towards the main vault. Jason ran the operation remotely, tracking their movements through the bank's internal systems. When they reached the vault, Tariq used his bombing skills to break into the safe. However, everything did not go as smoothly as planned. One of the security guards managed to sound an alarm, and police patrols began to arrive at the scene. Daryl realized they were running out of time and ordered them to speed up. They quickly loaded the money into their bags and began to leave. Kevin was waiting for them at the back entrance with the transport ready. They managed to leave the bank shortly before the police arrived, but the chase began immediately. Kevin showed his skill by steering the car away from his pursuers through the narrow streets and expressways of San Francisco. Their path was full of dangers, but thanks to a clear plan and coordination of actions, they were able to escape from the city and hide in a safe place. The success of this operation was triumphant, and the reward exceeded all expectations. The return to Los Angeles went smoothly. With a huge amount of money and a new status in the criminal world, they decided it was time to take a break and lay low. They distributed the money and went their separate ways temporarily to avoid unnecessary attention and give the police time to cool down. However, each of them knew that this was only a temporary calm before the next storm. The world of crime never leaves its players alone. Daryl and his team were prepared for new challenges and dangers that could come their way. They knew that their future was uncertain, but they were sure of one thing. Together, they could overcome any challenge. A few months later, the team began to come together, again feeling the desire to act and the ambition that had haunted them. The money they earned in San Francisco provided them with a luxurious life, but each of them knew that the adrenaline and excitement of operations was what made them truly alive. Daryl, analyzing the situation, realized that their next goal should be something even more ambitious and profitable. They decided to go international and take on the work that would make them legends. Information about a large shipment of diamonds that was to be transported from London to Dubai interested them. This was an opportunity that could not be missed. Jason got to work, starting to gather information about the route, security, and possible weaknesses in the supply chain. Mikey and Tariq began planning the details of the operation, taking into account all possible risks and escape routes. Kevin researched routes and vehicles to ensure a quick and safe escape. Jerome, as always, prepared for any eventuality by studying weapons and security measures. They arrived in London disguised as tourists, exploring the area and setting up a temporary base. Jason hacked the security systems of a company responsible for transporting diamonds, gaining access to time and route information. They learned that the jewelry would be transported in an armored convoy with heavy security. The day of the operation arrived. Daryl and his team set up an ambush along the convoy's route. Using diversions and false signals, they were able to force the convoy to change route and head into a trap. Mikey and Tarek, acting quickly and decisively, neutralized the guards, and Jerome provided cover. When they reached the armored vehicle containing the diamonds, Tarek used his explosive skills to open it. Inside, they found an incredible amount of jewelry, which they quickly packed and loaded into prepared vehicles. Kevin, who was waiting nearby, began a quick and risky escape from the city, maneuvering through the streets and avoiding police patrols. However, this time, everything was not so simple. British police and intelligence agencies were alerted to the possible theft, and a large-scale manhunt began for the team. The chase through the streets of London was intense and dangerous, but thanks to Kevin's skill, they managed to escape from the encirclement and escape to safety. They knew it was dangerous to stay in London, so they decided to split up and go to different countries. Daryl went to Dubai, Mikey and Tarek to Southeast Asia, Jason to Europe, and Jerome and Kevin to South America. This temporary separation was supposed to confuse the pursuers and give them the opportunity to lie low safely. Each of them understood that their paths would cross again. They continued to keep in touch and share news, planning for the future. Life on the edge, full of dangers and risks, has become the norm for them. They knew that each new day could bring both success and failure, but they were ready for any challenge. Their story continued, and new adventures and challenges awaited them. Several months had passed since their last operation in London. Daryl and his team, separated and hiding in different parts of the world, continued to communicate and exchange information. Despite the temporary lull, their professional skills and reputation as hired killers remained in demand. One day, Daryl received a message from Jason, who was in Europe. Jason learned of a large criminal network associated with the international arms and drug trade. The head of this network, known as Victor Crone, became the target of several powerful people who were willing to pay huge sums of money to eliminate him. This was not just a murder, but a complex operation that required not only the elimination of the target, but also the destruction of its infrastructure. Daryl brought the team together to discuss. They decided to act quickly and decisively. Each of them took on the preparation of his part of the operation. Jason continued to gather information about Victor Crone and his operations. Mikey and Tarek were developing an infiltration and assassination plan. Kevin studied possible escape routes, and Jerome prepared for the most brutal fights. The operation began with the infiltration of Victor Crone's mansion, located on the outskirts of Vienna. Jason hacked the security systems, allowing the team to enter unhindered. Mikey and Tarek quickly and silently neutralized the guards, paving the way for Daryl and Jerome. They moved smoothly and methodically, eliminating all obstacles in their path. When they reached Victor's office, he realized that his days were numbered. Daryl and Jerome burst inside, leaving him no chance of escape. Victor tried to fight back, but was quickly and calmly eliminated. However, their mission did not end there. Daryl knew that for the operation to be completely successful, they needed to destroy Crone's infrastructure and eliminate his closest associates. They split up to strike multiple targets at once. Jason coordinated the team's actions, directing them to weapons depots and drug laboratories. Mikey and Tarek took over the weapons warehouse. Using explosives, Tarek placed charges around the entire perimeter, preparing it for destruction. Mikey, covering him, monitored security and ensured the safety of the operation. When everything was ready, they retreated to a safe distance and blew up the warehouse, destroying a huge amount of weapons and ammunition. Meanwhile, Jerome and Kevin headed towards the drug laboratory. They got inside and quickly neutralized the guards. Jerome set up the explosives while Kevin kept an eye out for possible reinforcements. When everything was ready, they also left the site and blew up the laboratory, dealing a serious blow to Crone's drug business. The return to safety went smoothly. The team reconvened, discussing the success of the operation and next steps. They knew that the destruction of Victor Crone and his empire would attract even more attention to them, but they were ready for it. Their reputation as the most brutal and effective assassins only strengthened, and they knew that new assignments and challenges awaited them. Daryl and his team continued to operate, always one step ahead of their enemies. Their story continued, and each new day brought new challenges and opportunities. They knew that their path was full of dangers, but they were ready for any challenges, knowing that together they could overcome any obstacles. Michael's team celebrated their next victory in a secluded place, far from the eyes of prying eyes. Their reputation continued to grow, and new orders came with enviable regularity. However, they understood that sooner or later someone would want to get even with them for destroying the empire of Victor Crone. Soon, a new goal appeared on the horizon. The gang received an order from a powerful businessman who was threatened by competitors. The target was a Mexican drug lord known for his brutality and influence. His elimination promised not only a substantial reward, but also a significant strengthening of the gang's reputation. Michael and his team began carefully planning the operation. They knew that confronting the Mexican drug lord would not be easy. He was surrounded by loyal and well-armed people, and his mansion was a real fortress. Michael decided that it would be best to use surprise tactics and a carefully thought-out plan. Daryl and Jerome took on the role of scouts. They entered Mexico disguised as tourists and began collecting information about the drug lord's movements and habits. Meanwhile, Mikey and Tarek developed a plan of attack, and Jason coordinated the team's actions and ensured the supply of all the necessary equipment. After several weeks of preparation, the team was ready to carry out the mission. They chose night for their attack, knowing that the guards would be less vigilant. Using their connections, they were able to enter the mansion and quietly approach the building. Jerome and Kevin neutralized the guards on the outer perimeter, while Daryl and Tarek made their way inside. Mikey provided cover, making sure no one raised the alarm. They moved quickly and silently, like shadows, leaving behind only corpses. When they reached the drug lord's bedroom, he was already waiting for them, surrounded by his bodyguards. A fierce firefight ensued. Bullets whistled as they rushed past and blood flowed like a river. Michael's team acted harmoniously as a single organism. One by one, the bodyguards fell, until finally it was the turn of the drug lord himself. Michael personally put an end to his life by shooting him in the head. After making sure that the mission was completed, the team quickly left the crime scene. They understood that time was working against them, and every minute in enemy territory could be their last. But despite all the risks, they returned to their shelter safe and sound. This operation was one of the most difficult and risky of their careers, but it also brought them great satisfaction and a sense of accomplishment. They knew that new challenges awaited them, but they were ready for them because their story was just beginning. After successfully eliminating the Mexican drug lord, Michael's team returned to the United States. Their reputation grew to unprecedented heights, and now they could choose the most complex and highest-paying orders. However, as fame grew, so did the risks. Competitors and enemies were not asleep, and their every move was under fire. One night, Michael received a message from an unknown source. It was a call from a wealthy businessman who needed their services to eliminate a dangerous politician. Known for his tough stance against corruption and crime, the politician became a target for many who wanted to keep their shady dealings in the shadows. The businessman offered a huge sum to eliminate this man, and Michael could not refuse such a challenge. The team gathered for the next meeting. Michael explained that their target was a politician who was under constant guard and lived in the heart of the city. This will be one of the most difficult tasks they have ever faced. They began to carefully plan the operation, breaking down every detail into many stages. The first step was to study the target's moving habits and routes. Daryl and Jerome took over reconnaissance again. They followed the politician, studying his daily routine and travel routes. It turned out that every morning he goes for a run in the park, where security, although tighter, was still less attentive. Michael decided to use this moment to attack. They chose a quiet alley in the park, where the guards momentarily lost visual contact with the politician. On the appointed morning, the team was ready. Daryl and Tarek took up positions at opposite ends of the alley, preparing to attack. Mikey and Kevin kept watch over security, ready to act if necessary. When the politician entered the alley, the team began to act. Michael and Jerome attacked with lightning speed, eliminating the closest bodyguards. The politician did not have time to understand what was happening when Michael approached him and fired a fatal shot. Everything happened in a matter of seconds, and the team quickly fled the crime scene. The return to the shelter went without problems. After making sure they weren't being followed, they discussed the success of the operation. This was one of the most daring murders, and they knew that the consequences would not be long in coming. However, their reputation was once again confirmed, and they were ready for new challenges. Michael knew that they would now be targeted by many enemies, but he had faith in his team. Together, they could overcome any obstacles. Their story continued, and each new day brought new challenges and opportunities. Several weeks had passed since the assassination of the politician, and Michael's team tried to remain invisible, knowing that they might be hunted. However, the life of hired killers did not leave them time to rest. The new order came from a mysterious client who offered an incredible amount for the liquidation of a large businessman known for his illegal schemes and connections with the criminal world. The businessman lived in a luxurious mansion, surrounded by a high fence and a security system. Michael knew that this time they would need more complex and cunning tactics. He decided to use his connections to get inside the mansion under the guise of service personnel. The first step was to prepare fake documents and forms for the team. Mikey, with his hacking skills, created perfect fakes that allowed them to work in the mansion as cleaners and gardeners. This gave them the opportunity to study the building's internal structure and security system. A few days later, the team was ready to complete the task. On the day of the attack, they began their shift, moving according to a predetermined plan. Michael and Tarek entered the main part of the mansion where the businessman's office was located. Daryl and Jerome took up positions in case emergency cover was needed, and Mikey monitored the security system to turn off the cameras at the right moment. When everything was ready, Michael gave the signal. They burst into the office of a businessman who, realizing what was happening, tried to call security. But it was already too late. Tarek neutralized the guards, and Michael calmly dealt with the target. Everything happened so quickly that no one had time to understand what was happening. The team quickly left the mansion, returning to their normal roles as maintenance staff. They left unnoticed, leaving behind only a slight trace of chaos. After making sure that no one was following them, they returned to their hideout, discussing the success of the operation and their next steps. However, the next day there were news reports about the mysterious murder of a famous businessman. Enemies began to look for those who might be involved in this case, and Michael's team found themselves at gunpoint. They understood that, in their world, every successful operation brings closer the moment when someone will try to get even with them. Despite all the dangers, Michael knew that his team was ready for anything. They were the best at what they did and could overcome any obstacle. Their story continued, and each new day brought new challenges and opportunities. A week had passed since the last operation, and Michael's team tried to remain in the shadows, observing the news and rumors that were spreading in criminal circles. They understood that sooner or later someone would try to get on their trail, and prepared for any development of events. However, despite all the precautions, they had to face a new threat. One night, while they were discussing another order, their hideout was attacked. Unknown armed people broke through the perimeter and began to storm the building. Michael's team was prepared for such a development of events and immediately entered the battle. Daryl and Jerome took up defensive positions at the entrance, repelling the onslaught of attackers. Tariq, possessing excellent sniper skills, took a position at the window on the second floor, neutralizing the enemies one by one. Mikey tried to hack into their communications to figure out who was behind the attack and was able to temporarily disable their communications. Michael and Jason coordinated the team's actions, moving around the building and eliminating opponents. They acted harmoniously as a single unit, which allowed them to maintain their positions. It soon became clear that the attackers were professionals, but they did not expect to meet such fierce resistance. In the midst of the battle, Mikey managed to hack the enemy's communication system and found out that one of Michael's old enemies was behind the attack, a once influential crime boss who wanted revenge for the loss of his people and business. This was a man that Michael had encountered in the past and who was now determined to end him once and for all. The situation became increasingly tense, but the team continued to hold the line. Tarek, seeing that the enemy's forces were beginning to deplete, suggested that Michael counterattack. They decided to use smoke bombs to disorient the enemy, and taking advantage of the opportunity, went on the offensive. Under the cover of smoke, Daryl and Jerome broke through to the center of the enemy group, beginning close combat. Michael and Tarek supported them with fire, destroying the remnants of the enemy forces. Soon the attackers realized that they were losing and began to retreat. Michael's team pursued them, leaving no chance of salvation. When the last of the attackers was neutralized, Michael and his team gathered in the shelter, discussing what had happened. They understood that this was only the first wave and that their old enemy would not stop there. They had to find him and eliminate the threat once and for all. Michael decided to be proactive. They began to gather information on the enemy's location in preparation for the final confrontation. New trials and dangers awaited them ahead, but they were ready for anything because their story continued. Each new victory made them stronger, and they knew that together they could overcome any obstacles. Gathering in the shelter, Michael's team began planning their next operation. They knew that their old enemy would not stop, and the only way to ensure their safety was to destroy him before he struck again. Mikey, using his hacking skills, infiltrated the enemy's network and began collecting information about his location and plans. A few days later, they managed to find out that their enemy was hiding in an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city, where he was gathering forces for a new attack. It was a heavily guarded base with numerous traps and security systems. Michael knew that this time they would face serious resistance. The team carefully prepared for the operation. They studied the factory layout, developed several entry routes, and assigned roles. On the day of the attack, they split into two groups. Daryl and Tarek were to enter through the ventilation shafts, and Michael, Jerome, and Mikey were to attack from the main entrance. At night, they began their raid. Michael and Jerome, using hacked access codes, opened the main gate and entered the factory. They moved carefully, neutralizing guards and avoiding traps. At this time, Daryl and Tarek moved through the ventilation shafts, preparing to attack from the rear. When both groups reached the central hall of the factory, they were ready for the final showdown. The enemy was waiting for them, surrounded by his best people. A fierce firefight ensued. Bullets whistled as they bounced off the metal walls, and the echo of gunfire echoed throughout the building. Michael and his team acted in a coordinated and decisive manner. Daryl and Tarek suddenly attacked from the rear, creating panic among the enemies. Mikey used his hacking skills to disable the factory's security system, giving his opponents no advantage. In the midst of the battle, Michael noticed his old enemy hiding behind the boxes. He realized that this moment was decisive. Michael, overcoming resistance, broke through to him. Their eyes met, and the enemy realized that his end was near. Michael, not giving a chance for salvation, fired an accurate shot, putting an end to their long-standing conflict. When the last enemy fell, the team gathered in the central hall. They surveyed the aftermath of the battle, feeling relieved and satisfied with the mission accomplished. Michael knew it was one of the most difficult operations, but they did it. Now that their old enemy was destroyed, the team could relax for a while. They returned to their hideout to discuss next steps and share plans for the future. They understood that there would always be new challenges and enemies in their world, but together they could overcome any difficulties. The story of Michael and his team continued. Each new day brought new challenges and opportunities, and they were ready for them, knowing that together they could overcome any obstacles. After successfully eliminating their old enemy, Michael's team returned to their hideout, hoping for some respite. However, the world of mercenaries does not know peace, and soon a new task awaited them. This time the client was a powerful tycoon who needed to eliminate a competitor who was threatening his business. The task seemed simple: infiltrate a private party organized by a competitor and eliminate him. The team carefully planned the operation, studying all possible approaches and escape routes. They decided to go undercover, mingling with the guests. Daryl and Tariq, as the most experienced fighters, took on the main roles in the operation. Michael, Jerome, and Mikey were to provide cover and monitor the situation. Everything went according to plan until they approached their goal. There was heavy security at the party, and the situation was more tense than they expected. At the moment when Daryl approached the target to deliver the fatal blow, the guards unexpectedly reacted and raised the alarm. A firefight ensued, and the team found themselves in the middle of chaos. Daryl, covering the retreat of his comrades, fought with numerous guards. At that moment, Jerome noticed that one of the guards was aiming at Daryl from around the corner. Without hesitation, Jerome rushed to help, covering his friend with his body. The bullet intended for Daryl hit Jerome. He fell to the floor, seriously wounded, but managed to shoot his attacker, ending the threat. Michael, seeing what happened, reacted instantly. He and Tarek picked up Jerome and, using covering fire, began to retreat. Mikey provided cover by hacking into security systems to open exits. They barely made it to the exit, carrying their seriously wounded friend. When they returned to the shelter, it became clear that Jerome's wound was too serious. Despite all his efforts, he died in the arms of his comrades. It was a difficult loss for the team. Jerome was not just a comrade, he was a friend, a brother in arms. Michael and the rest of the gang gathered to pay their respects to their fallen comrade. They knew that his sacrifice had saved them all, and they vowed to avenge his death. They continued their activities, becoming even more cautious and decisive. Jerome's death left a deep mark on the team. Michael understood that now they must be even more vigilant, because the world in which they live does not forgive mistakes. Each new day brought new challenges, and they were ready for them, knowing that the memory of Jerome would always be with them, giving them the strength to overcome any obstacles. After Jerome's death, Michael's team became even more united and cautious. The memory of their fallen friend gave them strength and determination to continue the fight. They knew that every new day brings new dangers, but they were ready for anything. Soon a new order arrived which promised a lot of money but was incredibly dangerous. This time their target was an influential politician with ties to the underworld and using his power to advance the interests of criminal groups. The customer, an anonymous benefactor, provided all the necessary data and promised a generous reward for eliminating the target. Michael understood that this order could change the balance of power in their world, and accepted it without hesitation. The team began preparing for the operation. They studied the politician's schedule, his routes and places of stay. Mikey, using his hacking skills, broke into security systems and gained access to surveillance cameras and security protocols. Daryl and Tarek, as always, took the lead roles preparing for the immediate attack. The operation began at night when the politician was returning home after a meeting. His residence was surrounded by a high wall and many guards. Michael and his team moved carefully, avoiding cameras and patrols. They knew that the slightest mistake could cost them their lives. Daryl and Tarek used the shadows to make their way to the rear entrance of the residence. Mikey disabled the alarm system and the team got inside. There was another group of guards waiting for them inside the building, but they were ready. Quick and accurate actions made it possible to neutralize opponents without noise. When they reached the politician's office, he already realized that his days were numbered. Michael and Daryl burst inside, leaving him no chance of escape. The politician tried to fight back, but was quickly and calmly eliminated. However, their mission did not end there. Michael knew that for the operation to be completely successful, he had to destroy evidence of their presence and ensure a safe exit. Tariq began destroying documents and electronic media, while Daryl and Mikey prepared escape routes. They planted several explosive devices to create chaos and cover their tracks. When everything was ready, the team quickly left the building. Explosions occurred a few minutes after they left, destroying all evidence and giving them time to retreat. They returned to their shelter, tired, but satisfied with the successful completion of the task. After the successful completion of the last operation, Michael's team remained vigilant, aware that their activities were attracting more and more attention. They knew that danger could be lurking around every corner, and they could not afford to relax. Soon they received a new order which promised to be no less complex and dangerous. This time they had to eliminate a major international arms dealer who was supplying weapons to various terrorist groups around the world. This man was extremely careful and was always under close guard. The order came from an anonymous client who provided detailed information about the target's movements and habits. The team began preparations, gathering information and developing a plan. Mikey took it upon himself to hack into the security system of an arms dealer in order to gain access to his private data and travel routes. Daryl and Tarek prepared for immediate confrontation, studying the building's layout and possible entry routes. Michael and the rest of the team coordinated everything to ensure the operation went smoothly. A few days later, they were ready to complete the task. The arms dealer was in his residence on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by a high wall and numerous guards. Michael's team decided to operate at night to take advantage of the element of surprise. They made their way to the residence under cover of darkness, avoiding cameras and patrols. Mikey hacked the security system, disabling the alarm and surveillance cameras. Daryl and Tarek led the way, as always, neutralizing the guards and clearing the way for the others. When they reached the building, the team split up. Michael and Daryl headed to the arms dealer's office, where they believed he was located. Tarek and Mikey remained outside, providing cover and keeping an eye out for possible reinforcements. Michael and Daryl burst into the office, taking the merchant by surprise. He tried to reach for the weapon, but Daryl was faster and neutralized it. Michael approached the merchant to make sure he was no longer a threat. Meanwhile, Tarek noticed suspicious movement on the periphery of the security camera and realized that they had fallen into a trap. An armed detachment began to gather not far from the residence, ready to attack. Tarek and Mikey quickly reported this to Michael. The team realized that they had little time to retreat. Michael and Daryl quickly left the building to join the others. They knew they had to act quickly and decisively. Using pre-prepared retreat routes, the team made their way through the forest, hiding from their pursuers. Tariq and Daryl walked ahead, covering the rear. At that moment, a shot rang out and Tariq fell to the ground. Michael and the others immediately took up defensive positions, preparing for battle. Finding themselves under fire, the team fought with despair, realizing that their lives depended on every shot. Mikey, using his skills, found a path through the forest that could lead them to safety. Michael and Daryl, despite their wounds and fatigue, covered the retreat, providing cover for their comrades. When they finally reached safety, Tariq was seriously wounded but alive. Michael and the others gave him first aid and quickly transported him to a previously prepared shelter. There, they could take a breath and discuss what had happened. Jerome's death and Tarek's injuries reminded the team of how dangerous their world was. However, they knew they couldn't stop. Their story continued, and each new day brought new challenges and opportunities. Michael and his team were ready for any challenge, knowing that together they could overcome any obstacle. Time passed and Michael's team continued its activities, despite all the dangers and losses. After Tarek was wounded, they became even more careful and carefully planned each operation. Soon a new order arrived, which this time concerned a large drug cartel that was terrorizing an entire region. Michael's team received information that the head of the cartel would be attending a secret meeting with other criminal leaders. This was an excellent opportunity to strike at the entire drug trafficking network. The order came from an international agency fighting drug trafficking, which promised a significant reward for the success of the operation. Michael and his team began preparations. Mikey hacked the cartel's security systems to gain access to routes and meeting plans. Daryl and Tarek prepared for combat by studying the floor plan of the building where the meeting was to take place. Michael coordinated all team members to ensure the operation went smoothly. The night before the operation was tense. They knew that one of the most difficult tasks awaited them, and they were prepared for any surprises. When the time came, the team moved to the meeting point, an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Mikey turned off the security cameras and alarms, allowing the team to silently enter the area. They moved through the warehouse, avoiding patrols and traps. When they reached the main hall where the meeting was taking place, it became clear that the situation was more complicated than they had expected. There was more security there than expected. Michael decided to split the team. Tarek and Daryl took over the main security forces, and Michael and Mikey were supposed to eliminate the head of the cartel and his closest associates. They acted quickly and decisively as always. A fierce firefight ensued, and the building was filled with the roar of gunfire. Tarek, despite his injury, fought with despair and courage. He understood that the lives of his comrades and the success of the entire operation were at stake. Daryl covered him, destroying the enemies one by one. Michael and Mikey made their way to the location where the head of the cartel was located and eliminated him, depriving the organization of its leader. However, in the midst of the battle, Mikey was seriously injured. Michael, seeing that his friend was in danger, rushed towards him, covering his retreat. They knew they had to leave the building as quickly as possible before cartel reinforcements arrived. Michael and Daryl helped Mikey escape the building, leaving the shattered remains of the drug cartel in their wake. The team returned to their shelter, seriously wounded, but alive. Mikey needed urgent medical attention, and Michael did everything possible to save his friend. They realized that this time they were on the edge, but they managed to survive and complete the task. Michael's team was healing their wounds and digesting recent events. Their life continued to balance on a knife's edge, and they knew that the long-awaited peace would not shine for them. However, new orders were not long in coming. This time they had to confront a powerful criminal organization involved in human trafficking. The target was an important figure who ran this disgusting business from the shadows. The order came from a human rights organization determined to take desperate measures to end the suffering of innocent people. Michael and his team are at it again. Mikey, with his incredible hacking skills, soon discovered that their target was in a heavily guarded complex on the outskirts of the city. This place was known for its powerful defense systems and well-trained guards. The team understood that they were facing one of the most difficult operations. After several days of preparation and studying all possible scenarios, they were ready. At night, they entered the complex, moving silently and smoothly. Daryl and Tariq, as always, walked ahead, neutralizing the guards. Michael and Mikey followed them, preparing to engage their main target. Having reached the building where their enemy was hiding, the team split up. Daryl and Tariq began eliminating the remaining guards while Michael and Mikey got inside. They managed to get to the defendant's office without unnecessary noise. Inside, they found him talking to someone via video conference. Michael quickly assessed the situation and realized that this was their chance. He burst into the room, aiming his weapon at his target. The man tried to resist, but was instantly neutralized. Michael knew that this man was responsible for many human tragedies, and without hesitation, he carried out the sentence. However, their mission is not over yet. Suddenly, sirens filled the complex and the team realized they had been discovered. Michael and Mikey hurried out, joining Daryl and Tarek, who were already fighting with the guards. The situation was heating up, and they had to act decisively. Tariq suggested using explosives to create a distraction and open an escape route. Michael approved the plan, and soon a series of explosions destroyed part of the building, plunging everything into chaos. The team took advantage of the moment and began to retreat. They moved quickly, dodging bullets and overcoming obstacles. Michael covered the retreat of his comrades until he was sure that everything was safe. When they finally reached the shelter, the team was exhausted but pleased with the successful completion of the mission. They knew that their actions saved many lives and put an end to a cruel business. Over the next days, Michael and his team discussed what had happened, realizing that every time they risked their lives for the sake of justice. They knew that their path would not be easy, but they were ready to continue the fight. New challenges awaited them, and each new day brought new challenges and opportunities. Michael and his team were prepared for any challenge, knowing that together they could overcome any obstacle. After a recent operation, Michael's team found a secluded place to recuperate. They chose an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, turning it into a temporary shelter. Here, among the dusty boxes and rusty metal structures, they could finally catch their breath and discuss their next steps. Silence reigned in the abandoned warehouse, broken only by muffled conversations and the sounds of wounds being bandaged. Tariq, seriously wounded, tried to cope with the pain. The team knew that their next move had to be thoughtful and precise. Soon Mikey, deep in work on his laptop, announced a new order. This was a large order from a high-ranking official who wanted to get rid of a corrupt colleague. The target was the Director of National Intelligence, known for his ties to crime syndicates. The elimination of this figure could deal a serious blow to the criminal network. The team began preparations. They carefully studied the layout of the building where the target was located and developed an infiltration strategy. The night of the operation was moonless, and they moved in complete darkness. Mikey, as always, hacked the security system, opening access to the building. Daryl and Tarek silently neutralized the guards, clearing the way for the others. Having penetrated the building, the team carefully moved along the corridors, avoiding cameras and patrols. When they reached the principal's office, Michael and Daryl burst in, taking him by surprise. The man tried to resist, but was quickly subdued. Wasting no time, the team began to inspect the office, destroying all evidence of their presence. Mikey used his skills to hack into the director's computer to gather incriminating information. Meanwhile, Daryl and Tarek held the line, preparing for possible reinforcements. When all the data was collected, the team began to retreat. They moved quickly and smoothly, leaving the building before the security could react. The explosions they set up earlier created a distraction, allowing them to escape into the darkness. Returning to their shelter, the team took a breath, realizing that the operation was successful. The destruction of the Director of National Intelligence and the collection of incriminating data dealt a powerful blow to the criminal network. Their actions caused chaos and destabilized many criminal groups. Time passed, and Michael's team continued their dangerous work without slowing down. The last few operations went flawlessly, but tension within the team was growing. Each knew that the next mission could be their last, and that the world in which they existed was full of unpredictable threats. One day, when the team was resting in their temporary shelter, Mikey, who was monitoring the network, came across important information. A new enemy appeared on the horizon, a large criminal syndicate that was planning a large-scale operation to smuggle weapons across the border. This syndicate posed a serious threat not only to Michael's team, but to the entire country. Michael gathered everyone for a discussion. They decided that it was necessary to intervene and stop this operation, despite all the risks. The team began preparations, developing a plan of action. They understood that this would be one of the most difficult and dangerous tasks, but it was not in their rules to retreat. Gathering information took several days. Mikey hacked into the syndicate's secure servers and learned that a meeting of the leaders and key participants in the operation was to take place in an abandoned factory in the border area. The place was heavily guarded and difficult to reach, but the team had a plan. The day of the operation arrived. They moved quickly and decisively, moving through the forest that surrounded the factory. Michael, as always, walked ahead, coordinating the actions of his comrades. Daryl and Tarek advanced from the flanks, ready to fight. Mikey remained in the rear, monitoring the situation and providing communications. When they reached the factory, it became clear that the enemy was waiting for them. Security guards and surveillance systems were placed throughout the perimeter. Michael and his team knew that time was on their side. They had to act quickly and quietly. They split into two groups to create the effect of surprise. The first group, consisting of Michael and Daryl, entered through the ventilation shafts. The second group, Tariq and Mikey, took up positions on the roof from where they could monitor the situation and cover their comrades. Everything went according to plan until one of the guards accidentally stumbled upon Tariq. A shootout ensued. Michael, hearing the shots, realized that there was no more time for covert penetration. He and Daryl rushed to the meeting place of the syndicate leaders, leaving chaos and the corpses of the guards in their wake. During this time, Mikey used his skills to hack the factory's surveillance system to disorient the enemy. Upon reaching the central hall, Michael and Daryl encountered the leader of the syndicate. The battle was fierce and merciless. Bullets whistled, bouncing off the metal walls, and every step could be the last. Michael, risking his life, approached the leader and, after a short but fierce fight, managed to eliminate him. Meanwhile, Tariq and Mikey continued to fend off the guards' attacks, creating cover for their comrades. When the last bullet was fired and the enemy retreated, the team gathered in the central hall. They understood that they had won, but the price was high. Returning to the shelter, they realized that their actions had prevented a major tragedy. The elimination of the crime syndicate and the disruption of their operation was a significant blow to the underworld. Despite their fatigue and injuries, the team knew that this was their victory. With each new task, they became stronger and more experienced, realizing that their path was full of dangers. But they were ready for new challenges, knowing that together they could overcome any obstacles. The story of Michael and his team continued, and each new day brought new challenges and opportunities. Michael's team, despite the victories, became increasingly aware of the severity of their losses. Recent operations had heightened their sense of danger, and everyone knew that the price of their successes was inevitably high. They decided to take on a new order, the elimination of another dangerous crime boss, whose actions threatened peace in the region. This authority ran a smuggling network spanning several countries and was known for his brutality. The operation promised to be extremely dangerous, but the team accepted the challenge, realizing that it was their duty. Their target was hidden in a heavily guarded estate on the outskirts of the city. Mikey, as always, took it upon himself to hack the security systems to gain access to the building's internal structure. Daryl and Tariq prepared for battle, studying every corner of the building's layout. The operation began at night. The team entered the estate, moving silently and smoothly. Michael, Daryl, and Tariq entered through the main entrance, while Mikey and another team member, Alex, provided cover and prepared an escape route. When they reached the central hall where their target was located, a fierce firefight began. The enemy was expecting them and was ready for battle. The bullets whistled, and the team acted harmoniously, but an unexpected event disrupted their plan. One of the guards, hiding behind a column, threw a grenade right into the center of the hall. Daryl, noticing the grenade, rushed at it, trying to save his comrades. The explosion tore his body apart, and the noise of the explosion deafened everyone around him. Michael, seeing the death of his friend, flew into a rage and began to shoot back with a vengeance. But this was not the end of their problems. Just when they thought the situation was under control, another guard, hidden in the darkness, fired from cover, hitting Tariq. The bullet pierced the bulletproof vest, and Tariq, clutching his wound, fell to his knees. Michael, realizing that he was losing another friend, rushed to him, covering him from enemy fire. They knew they had to leave immediately. Mikey, having received a signal about the problem, began to create a diversion by hacking the security system and setting off an explosion in another part of the estate. This gave Michael and the others the opportunity to carry the wounded Tariq out and leave the building. When they returned to their hideout, the loss was painful. Daryl died sacrificing himself for the sake of the team, and Tarek, despite all his efforts, did not survive his wounds. Their death left a deep mark in the hearts of their comrades. Michael and the remaining team members gathered to pay their respects to their fallen friends. They understood that their mission was ongoing and that they needed to be even stronger and more careful. The memory of Daryl and Tarek will always be with them, giving them strength in the fight for justice. The story of Michael's team continued despite losses and difficulties. Each new day brought new challenges, and they were ready for them. Determination and desire burned in their hearts to continue the fight, knowing that together they could overcome any obstacles. Michael's team, despite the victories, became increasingly aware of the severity of their losses. Recent operations had heightened their sense of danger, and everyone knew that the price of their successes was inevitably high. They decided to take on a new order, the elimination of another dangerous crime boss, whose actions threatened peace in the region. This authority ran a smuggling network spanning several countries and was known for his brutality. The operation promised to be extremely dangerous, but the team accepted the challenge, realizing that it was their duty. Their target was hidden in a heavily guarded estate on the outskirts of the city. Mikey, as always, took it upon himself to hack the security systems to gain access to the building's internal structure. Daryl and Tarek prepared for battle, studying every corner of the building's layout. The operation began at night. The team entered the estate, moving silently and smoothly. Michael, Daryl, and Tarek entered through the main entrance, while Mikey and another team member, Alex, provided cover and prepared an escape route. When they reached the central hall where their target was located, a fierce firefight began. The enemy was expecting them and was ready for battle. The bullets whistled, and the team acted harmoniously, but an unexpected event disrupted their plan. One of the guards, hiding behind a column, threw a grenade right into the center of the hall. Daryl, noticing the grenade, rushed at it, trying to save his comrades. The explosion tore his body apart, and the noise of the explosion deafened everyone around him. Michael, seeing the death of his friend, flew into a rage and began to shoot back with a vengeance. But this was not the end of their problems. Just when they thought the situation was under control, another guard, hidden in the darkness, fired from cover, hitting Tariq. The bullet pierced the bulletproof vest, and Tariq, clutching his wound, fell to his knees. Michael, realizing that he was losing another friend, rushed to him, covering him from enemy fire. They knew they had to leave immediately. Mikey, having received a signal about the problem, began to create a diversion by hacking the security system and setting off an explosion in another part of the estate. This gave Michael and the others the opportunity to carry the wounded Tariq out and leave the building. When they returned to their hideout, the loss was painful. Daryl died sacrificing himself for the sake of the team, and Tariq, despite all his efforts, did not survive his wounds. Their death left a deep mark in the hearts of their comrades. Michael and the remaining team members gathered to pay their respects to their fallen friends. They understood that their mission was ongoing and that they needed to be even stronger and more careful. The memory of Daryl and Tarek will always be with them, giving them strength in the fight for justice. After the tragic loss of Daryl and Tarek, the remaining members of Michael's team, Michael, Mikey, and Alex, were determined to avenge their friends. The pain of loss strengthened their spirit, and they were ready to do everything possible to destroy those who were behind the death of their comrades. They collected all possible information about the person responsible for the attack on their hideout. This was a high-ranking crime boss named Carlos Mendoza, known for his ruthlessness and extensive connections in the underworld. He was hiding in a fortified mansion in the mountains, surrounded by loyal guards. Michael knew that attacking Mendoza in his lair would be suicide, but there was no other choice. They developed a plan that included infiltrating the mansion under the guise of technical workers. Mikey used his hacking skills to create fake documents and passes. On the day of the operation, they arrived at the mansion, pretending to be a team of technicians who were supposed to conduct a security check. The guards let them through without suspecting a trick. Having penetrated inside, the team began to move towards Mendoza's office. When they reached the office, Michael and Alex burst in, taking Mendoza and his guards by surprise. A fierce firefight began. Mikey, who remained in the corridor, hacked into the surveillance system to disorient the guards and turn off the cameras. Michael and Alex methodically eliminated the guards as they advanced towards Mendoza. Suddenly, one of the guards, hiding behind a massive bookcase, shot at Michael. The bullet pierced his bulletproof vest, and Michael, clutching his wound, fell to the floor. Alex, seeing this, rushed at the enemies with redoubled fury, but the situation became critical. Michael, struggling to get up, realized that he had little time left. He knew he had to finish what he started. Gathering his last strength, he pointed the weapon at Mendoza and fired, hitting him in the head. Mendoza fell, dead, but Michael knew this was not the end. The guards continued to advance. Alex tried to fight back, but there were too many of them. Mikey, hearing the shooting, rushed to help, but it was too late. Michael, with the last of his strength, covered his friends until he fell, bleeding. Alex and Mikey, realizing that they had lost their leader, barely made it out of the mansion, leaving destruction and death in their wake. They returned to their shelter, devastated and broken. Michael's death was a huge loss, but they knew his sacrifice was not in vain. Mendoza was dead and his empire began to crumble. The team has lost its leader, but the memory of Michael, Daryl, and Tarek will always be with them, inspiring them to continue to fight. After Michael's death, the team was devastated. Mikey and Alex, the survivors, tried to carry on, but without their leader, they felt lost. The loss of Michael, Daryl, and Tarek was too much to bear, and it began to affect their work. Mikey, who had always been the brains of the team, now felt a burden of responsibility that he was not prepared to bear alone. Alex, whose skill in battle knew no equal, was paralyzed with grief and rage. They tried to continue their activities, but without Michael, they could not find a common goal and direction. It soon became clear that their paths had diverged. Mikey, feeling tired from the endless struggle, decided to leave the criminal world. He found himself a job related to information security, hoping to use his skills for good. His time in the gang left a deep mark, but he wanted to return to a normal life and leave his bloody past behind. Alex, on the contrary, could not come to terms with the loss. He continued his fight alone, taking revenge on those he considered responsible for the deaths of his friends. His path became even more dangerous and unpredictable. Without the support of his team, he was forced to rely only on himself, and this made him even more bitter and ruthless. One day, when Alex encountered another criminal group, he realized that fighting alone made no sense. He was exhausted, and his soul was filled only with hatred and pain. At that moment, he realized that continuing on this path would only lead to his own death. Alex decided to leave, leaving his past behind. He left the city, hoping to start a new life away from the memories that haunted him. After moving to a small town, he found a non-violent job and tried to restore his soul. Michael's team fell apart, but their memory lived on in the hearts of those who knew them. Their sacrifices were not in vain. The destruction of Carlos Mendoza and his criminal network was a significant blow to the criminal world. However, the cost was too high, and their story remains a tragic reminder that life on the edge can destroy even the strongest. Mikey and Alex, each in their own way, found a way to move on. Time did not heal all the wounds, but they learned to live with the pain and continued on their way, leaving behind them the shadow of their dead friends. Their story is over, but the lessons they learned from their past will always be with them.